I'm a family lawyer, 8 years in, and most of my days are divorce papers, custody calendars, and screenshots of private messages no one wants to see. The only part that still feels like work to me is the part outside the office. Surveillance is simple. You go where they go, you keep your distance, and you write what you see. It's not glamorous. It is useful. Juries understand pictures too. Last August, a woman named Michelle Connor came in looking hollowed out. She put a folder on my desk with phone records and a printout of their shared calendar. Thomas, her husband, had been coming home later and later. New excuses, new passwords, less talking. She was convinced he was cheating. She said he worked at an advertising agency downtown on Main Street. She said, "I want proof." I told her I would follow him after work and get her answers. We set Thursday. I checked my gear that morning. Fresh SD cards, charged batteries, clean windshield, coffee, and a notebook for times. No confrontation. Document and go home. If he kissed someone who wasn't his wife, I'd have it. If he didn't, I'd have that too. By 5:30, I was parked half a block from his building, engine off, windows cracked, the lobby doors framed in my windshield. Rush hour pushed past in waves of brake lights and bus fumes. The agency occupied the third floor of an old brick building with high windows and a brass directory that still listed companies that died a decade ago. At 5:40, lights blinked off in rows. Office people drifted out in groups. I watched the door and my mirrors, and I wrote down each minute that passed. A gray sedan idled at the curb, then left. Not him. A cleaning cart rattled past the glass, and then the lobby cleared out. Right at 6, I saw him. Thomas. Tall, careful haircut. Shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms. He paused like he was waiting for someone, then moved, alone, through the doors. He didn't look around. He walked to a gray sedan at the meter, unlocked it, and got in. I wrote down the plate and the time. I started my car and let a delivery van slide between us. He pulled away from the curb like he had a plan already set. Instead of heading toward the freeway that takes you to the suburbs, he turned the other way and drove deeper into downtown. We caught a green wave and wound past towers into the river of the highway. I stayed 2 lanes over, 2 cars back. The city thinned fast. Billboards turned into chain link and weeds. Exit signs got unfamiliar. He passed the turnoffs for the riverfront and the freight yard and kept going. We were pointed at the old industrial district. That stretch used to be smoke and whistles. Now it is mostly shells. He took the exit and dropped into a grid of cracked asphalt and leaning light poles. Warehouses with plywood windows sat on one side. Lots with busted pallets and thistles sat on the other. No pedestrians. No reason for a faithful husband to be there on a weeknight. He slowed by a chain-link gate and a pinked-out no trespassing sign, then rolled on and turned behind a long, low factory. The rusted sign frame still held the ghost of a company name. The place had been a textile mill that shut down 15 years ago. He pulled into the parking lot behind it, near the rear loading bays. I eased past, turned at the next corner, and parked behind a delivery truck 2 lots away with my lights off. I watched through the open space between buildings. He sat in his car a moment, hands at 10 and 2, then got out and headed for the bays. He walked steady, like he'd done it before. No bag, no flowers, no glance over his shoulder. He climbed through a broken first-floor window near the corner and vanished. I wrote the time again and waited. The lot was trash, glass, and weeds. A loose sheet of tin tapped on something hollow. A gull cried somewhere it shouldn't have. I set a 5-minute timer. If he was meeting someone, I didn't want to arrive at the same second. When the timer died, I stepped out, locked the car, and kept to the wall shadow until I reached the loading bays. The broken first-floor window he used was missing most of its glass. I crouched and looked in. It was dim, not black. It smelled like wet cloth, mold, and old oil. I slid my phone deep into a pocket and went hands-free. I went through the window into the dark and stood still to listen. Broken glass crunched under my shoe. I waited for the echo to settle and took it slower. Shapes resolved. A collapsed office cubicle, dented lockers, a stencil that still said, "Safety is everyone's job." Something dripped from somewhere you couldn't see. I moved along the wall, not across the middle where noise carries. My flashlight stayed put. Light makes people look at you. My eyes adjusted enough for steps. A shaft of late sun fell through a busted skylight and picked out a staircase at the back. The handrail was scaled with rust. Some steps were patched with plywood squares. I stopped at the bottom and listened again. It was the kind of quiet that makes you count your own breathing. I put my weight on the edges of the treads and tested each one. The old wood creaked anyway. I went up one step, then another, slow and flat-footed. At the landing, cooler night air moved across my face. I kept my shoulder to the wall and tested the last creaking step. Paint dust fell onto my sleeve. I leaned toward the open space, held my breath, and I could hear voices coming from the second floor. I climbed the last steps with my weight on the edges so the wood wouldn't cry out. The hallway was narrow and dusty, safety posters peeling on tacks. Voices came from the left. I moved slow until a half-open office door showed a slice of light. I leaned in and saw Thomas at an old metal desk with papers, a calculator, and a lamp throwing a hard circle across columns of numbers. He had the phone to his ear, elbow on the blotter. He wasn't whispering. He sounded like he'd practiced. He said, "Thursday by 9, no holds." Then he began listing numbers, slow, like the other person was writing them down. Long strings, repeated twice. I counted digits and tried to hang them on anything I could remember later. He read a routing number and corrected one digit. Amounts made me focus. One figure started with a 6 and had 5 more numbers after it. No names, just initials. Months instead of dates. August 24, September 9, then pause. He said a bank I knew and 2 I didn't. He tapped the calculator with one finger, listened, wrote on a legal pad, and tore sheets without folding them. The room smelled like dust and wet fabric. This was not romance. No flowers, no perfume, no second chair. Just paper and math inside a dead factory. He spoke in steady bursts, never raising his voice. He said, "Same structure as last time, and we don't hold it longer than 48. I stayed behind the door frame, breathing quiet and counting the useful parts. Time dragged. My watch didn't feel right each time I checked it. An hour passed by the look of the windows and the way the light fell. Finally, he stood, stacked the papers, slid the calculator into a manila envelope with them, and ended the call with, "I'll confirm after 9. He looked around once like he was checking for a lost pen. Then he walked out with the envelope under his arm and headed down the hall. I held my spot until his steps faded and the air settled. Quiet can trick you, so I counted to 60 twice, and then again. A scrape below, the soft slide of someone leaving through glass. I checked the lot from the window gap. Empty. I watched my watch for 5 more minutes and then 5 more. Only then did I move. I stayed another 20 minutes to be sure. My head kept replaying the digits and phrases. This wasn't adultery. This was money, and not small money. Hundreds of thousands. I backed away from the office, took the stairs slow, and climbed out the broken window. In the lot, I moved normal speed to my car, locked the doors, and set my notebook on the wheel. I wrote everything I could remember before it leaked away. The hallway, the door, the phrases, the amounts, the banks. Then I drove back to town and rehearsed plain sentences. I would tell Michelle I followed him, that he went to an abandoned factory, that there was no other woman, that he discussed transfers and routing numbers. I would keep to facts and nothing else. The highway rolled under me in black lanes and white dashes. A semi threw wind at my door, and then was gone. The city rose back up, messy and bright. I parked near my office, read my notes out loud once, and went upstairs. I locked the door and filed a copy in my safe. I slept light. In the morning, I prepared to call her. The meeting went as I expected. Michelle sat small with her hands on her bag. I told her where I followed Thomas, what I saw, what he said. I told her there was no sign of another woman, only numbers, dates, and transfers. She stared at the table, shocked, and said she knew nothing about extra income or new accounts or unusual purchases. She said, "We live on his salary and my part-time check." I asked about joint accounts, cards, cash, and any deposits she couldn't explain. She denied all of it. I laid out options in plain steps. Document more. Hire a forensic accountant. Go to the police. File and use Discovery to pull records. Each choice had cost and risk. She asked for time to think. A week later, on day 7, she called and said she was dropping the case and did not want to pursue it. Her voice was flat, like she was reading. She asked me to close the file and send the final invoice. I asked if she was safe. She said yes. I asked if she wanted referrals. She said no. The call ended. I called again and again. No answer. I mailed the invoice with a letter that summarized our talks in neutral language. It came back signed for, no note inside. I moved the file to inactive and stored my notes. Every few days at first, then less often, I checked the county arrest logs and the federal docket search. No Connor matched them. Months went by. The factory got fenced and posted. Weeds, then snow, then weeds again. I drove past once and didn't stop. I kept the photos and the notebook in my safe. I did not talk about them. Sometimes a case dies because people decide to bury it. Sometimes nothing surfaces because someone is careful, patient, and quiet in all the right places. Maybe Thomas stopped. Maybe he adjusted whatever he was doing so it would not brush the edges of people like me. I don't know. I only know what I saw and what I wrote down. Families hire me for love problems, but sometimes the real problem is money. It does not leave lipstick on collars. It leaves numbers. They hide in plain sight. Everything else stayed quiet, like the floor of that factory afterward. I learned that sometimes family secrets run much deeper than simple infidelity. I was working as a cardiac surgery nurse at St. Luke's Hospital in Denver about 6 years ago. Being new to the facility, I took whatever shifts I could get, mostly nights and weekends. The cardiac wing had flexible visiting hours all day and night. I learned the floor fast. 2 nurses' stations, 4 rooms to a hall, a dim step-down unit, and sliding glass doors that never closed quietly at night. My badge still felt stiff on my scrub top. I said yes to everything. Extra rounds, extra admissions, extra charting. Nights can be calm, but they can also turn fast. I kept my head down and stuck to policy. Wash hands, trace lines, check drains, document, repeat. I wanted to be invisible and useful at the same time. One particular patient, Mrs. Adams, came in through the ER with crushing chest pain and went to the OR for an emergency triple bypass. I got her the night she rolled out of recovery. She was tough, mid-60s, Clear head, strong grip, clean incision. Her vitals were steady by the second night. The team liked her numbers. My job was to keep her stable, manage pain, keep lines clean, and watch for any irregular beats. Her husband, Robert, stayed by her bedside almost non-stop for 4 days. He signed the visitor log at odd hours. He was polite, too polite. He stood up whenever I came in, even at 2 in the morning, and watched every move. I have seen family do that before. It can be love, or fear, or a need to feel useful. From the first day, something about him felt off. It started with small things. When I flushed her central line, he leaned forward like he needed to memorize it. When I scanned meds, he drifted toward my shoulder instead of giving space. He asked for the drug names and then asked where I lived, where I trained, what high school I went to. He asked if I jogged. He smiled the whole time. Fixed. His stare made my skin crawl, but I stayed professional. I kept answers short and redirected to his wife. I put the incentive spirometer in her hands, showed the call button again, adjusted the SCDs, and checked her drains. Mrs. Adams would squeeze my wrist and ask for ice chips. Once she murmured, "He just worries," and closed her eyes. The wing runs on routines. Midnight turns, 2 a.m. labs, 3 a.m. med pass, 4 a.m. vitals. You can feel a shift's rhythm when you have been on nights long enough. The first night with the Adamses was uneventful. At 2, I rechecked her dressing and lines, changed telemetry leads, updated the chart. Robert watched from the chair and never dozed. Every time I looked up, he was already looking at me. Between rooms, I kept catching him in reflections. The glass door, the dark TV screen, the window to the hallway. Not doing anything, just watching. I asked if he needed a blanket. He said he was not cold. I brought a fresh pillow. He said he would stand. He offered to carry my med tray once. I told him that was not allowed and slid it away from his reach. By the end of that first day, I logged him as over-involved. That is a category you learn fast. Not dangerous, just persistent. I told the charge he hovered and wrote it in my note. I reminded myself I was new and to stick to policy. Keep the door open. Keep distance. Say only what is necessary. On the second night, the floor was quieter than usual. A light snow started outside and turned the windows into gray paper. I had 4 patients. Mrs. Adams was the most stable, which is when you get surprised. Around 3 in the morning, her call light pinged at the desk. I grabbed my tablet and headed down the hall, shoes quiet on the waxed floor. The hallway was half lit. Inside her room, the monitor sat low and steady, the blue pulse ox glow on her hand like a tiny star. She appeared to be sleeping, chest rising in shallow, even breaths. The TV was off. The visitor chair was empty. That was odd. Robert never left. I checked the bathroom in the corner behind the curtain. No coat, no cup, no shoes. I moved to the IV pole and read the rates. Fluids, steady. Medline locked. I lifted the dressing edge and inspected the site. Clean, no redness, no seepage. I traced the tubing, checked the clamp, checked the labels on the bags. The pump ticked softly. The crash cart out in the hall hummed through the wall. I pulled her orders on the tablet to confirm the next pain dose. My back was to the door, and I told myself to keep moving and not think about it. I counted drops and followed the line with my fingers. The room was quiet. Then someone touched my shoulder. It was not a bump. It was a light, deliberate placement, like a cup set on a wrong table. I turned and almost dropped the tablet. Robert stood close behind me. Too close to read clearly in the dark, but I saw the thin line of his smile. He leaned toward my ear and whispered, "You have such beautiful hair." My scalp prickled, not from the words but from the warm, damp breath on my neck, like he had leaned in to smell. He spoke slow, like we had all the time in the world, like his wife was not 2 feet away with a fresh sternotomy. I stepped sideways and put the IV pole between us. I asked if he needed anything. He said he was thanking me, but he stayed too close. He didn't move, and the monitor kept ticking as I wrapped up, charting quickly. I quickly finished my check and left the room, my hands shaking. The rest of that shift passed without incident, but I still caught him staring at me from corners, the doorway, his chair. He tracked me with his eyes like I was another monitor he needed to watch. When the sun pushed through the gray glass, I signed off and went home. When I came back the next evening, there was a note on my workstation under the keyboard. It was creased twice. On the front, a heart in blue pen. Inside it said, "Thank you for everything, R.A." Under that, a phone number. I crumpled it, dropped it in the shred bin, and wiped the desk. Mr. Adams got bolder on the third night. He drifted to the nurse's station with reasons that were not reasons. He asked about his wife's bowel sounds. He asked for more ice. He asked if telemetry leads leave marks. After each question, he aimed at me. He asked where I parked. He asked if I hiked. He asked if I liked coffee. He tried to read my badge again. I moved the lanyard away and slid the visitor register toward him. The station smelled like sanitizer and burnt coffee. He leaned on the counter with his elbows down, eyes never leaving my face. I kept my answers brief and stuck to his wife's status. Behind him, the hallway cameras blinked their tiny lights. My colleague Sarah rolled in a vitals cart and slowed when she saw my shoulders tense. "Be careful," she said later in the supply room while we counted syringes. "Some of them get weird when they're tired and lonely." She tried to make it a joke, but her eyes stayed flat. I told her I was fine. This did not read as lonely. It read like he was pushing a border to see if it moved. I stayed close to the station and kept a heavy pen in my pocket. Around 5 in the morning on that third night, I was catching up on paperwork. The floor was quiet. I felt eyes on me before I saw him. When I looked up, Mr. Adams was peeking around his wife's doorframe. Only half his face showed. He wasn't checking the hall. He was fixed on me. As soon as our eyes met, he slipped back inside. I looked down, typed a line, and looked up again. He was there again. Same angle, same stare. He disappeared when I noticed. He was measuring something. I turned my chair so I could see his room in my peripheral and watched his reflection in the screen. The behavior was not an accident. He did not react to alarms 2 doors down. He only moved when I looked up. I made a note to report him to my supervisor in the morning with times and details. Mrs. Adams was scheduled for discharge the next day if her labs held. I told myself I just had to finish this shift without a scene. I kept my steps measured and stayed in open areas. When I entered her room to do a check, I stood so the door stayed open and announced each task for the chart microphone. He watched me from behind his wife's bed, hands in his pockets, the same thin smile. I kept the visit short and left. The rest of the night stretched longer than it should have. I pressed the badge reader to make sure it clicked. I asked Sarah to walk with me to the medroom. I logged each interaction. I kept thinking of that note now compacted with trash in the basement. Near shift change, I wrote down my plan. Email the supervisor, notify security, and move on. Mrs. Adams was discharged the next afternoon while I was off duty. When I came in that evening, Sarah met me at the door. She said he had spent an hour asking about me after his wife left. He wanted to know when I worked next. He asked what car I drove. He described the lot and the entrances. When the charge nurse told him I wasn't scheduled that day, his friendly face dropped into anger and he stormed out. The security guard on duty said Mr. Adams didn't actually leave right away. He was seen in the parking lot for another 30 minutes. He walked between cars in slow loops, head down, phone out, lifting it now and then like he was checking messages. The guard said he stopped near a black sedan, then near a small gray hatchback, and raised his phone again. He took photos. He stayed until the guard started walking his way. Then he got in his car and drove out. I stood at the station and felt a new cold settle in. I moved my badge inside my shirt. I asked to file a report right then. The supervisor handed me the form. I wrote out everything I could remember, including the whisper, the note, the peeking. A week later, administration received a formal complaint from Robert Adams. In it, he wrote that I had been unprofessional and inappropriate with him. He gave no specific details. He did not mention his wife's care. He signed his name in neat handwriting I recognized from the note. HR called me in to review it. I brought my report and the timestamps, and Sarah came to confirm what she saw. They said they would document everything and alert security if he returned. The complaint was closed as unfounded. I walked to my car with another nurse that night and checked my back seat before I got in. I realized I had underestimated how dangerous the situation had been. Staring felt small when it started. The note felt like a nuisance. The peeking felt juvenile. It wasn't. It was testing. I updated my routines at work. Security has my plate and shift times too. Now I always report concerning behavior immediately, no matter how minor it seems at first. I work nights cleaning shopping centers and office buildings to save for my wedding with Jessica. Our company takes the after-hours jobs when the places are closed and quiet. We're short-staffed, so they send me solo to smaller locations. It saves them money and gives me extra shifts. I clock in, do the checklist, and move to the next place. On Tuesday, September 23rd, they assigned me to clean the sports zone at Riverside Mall by myself. I parked by the service entrance and used the manager key from the lockbox. The mall corridor lights were on night mode, a dull yellow. I disarmed the alarm, signed the log on the clipboard by the door, and rolled my cart inside. I pulled the gate down over the front entrance and checked both side doors. Jessica and I need this job, so I double-check everything. Sports zone isn't huge. You can see from the shoe wall to the scooters by the front. The floor is gray tile with rubber mats around the registers. Glass displays hold watches and headphones. The changing rooms sit in back next to the stock door. In the back room there's a cardboard baler, racks of jerseys in plastic, and a ladder with a bent rung. The HVAC hums just loud enough to cover small sounds. I plug in a podcast and go through the motions. Mop the floor, empty trash, wipe the glass, dust the top shelves with the long duster that bends at the wrong angle. I wear nitrile gloves and carry a ring of keys that clinks on the cart handle. I do bathrooms first. After that, I pull out the vacuum and run straight lines down the main aisles so the manager sees them in the morning. Frank, my supervisor, likes seeing straight lines. On breaks, I write numbers in a small notebook: rent, car, venue deposit. Jessica wants a simple backyard wedding. I tell her we can do better. It keeps me moving when my feet are buzzing. The night smell is always the same: cleaner, cardboard, floor wax, new rubber. Around midnight, I was in the back room emptying the vacuum. It's a bagless type with a clear canister. You pop the latch and shake out the packed gray dust into a liner. I pulled the metal trash can closer so I didn't miss. Static made the dust cling to my sleeves. I tapped the side with my hand until the clumps fell. My podcast was in my ear. Two hosts arguing about a case I wasn't following. I tied off the bag and swapped it for a fresh one. Then I checked the back door again out of habit. The crash bar sat flush. The chain on the rolling cage was locked. Someone had dragged a pallet earlier. I could see skid marks on the concrete. I made a note to tell Frank. I put the vacuum back together and tugged the power cord free from under a wheel. The cord always finds places to catch. I wound it tight on the hooks. I pushed the cart to the threshold and looked out over the dark aisles. It's different standing still in a closed store. The shoe wall on the right has single shoes on pegs with size tags facing out. Jerseys hang in color blocks. The store speakers were off. The only sounds were the HVAC and the soft click of the exit sign by the mall gate. I tapped my phone. 12:07 a.m. In the mirror mounted high above the back door, I could see a slice of the sales floor. I set the spray bottle and a clean microfiber on the cart and stretched my back. My plan was simple. Finish the counters, run the mop, take trash to the compactor in the corridor, and leave by 1. I put the podcast back on and turned toward the main floor. I caught a flick of movement in the main store area out of the corner of my eye. I figured it was the security guard doing his rounds or Frank coming by to check if I had the checklist done. Frank likes surprise visits. I paused the podcast and pulled one earbud out. The store got very quiet. There was a soft scrape, like metal on metal out front. I put the spray bottle down and walked out to the sales floor to see what was going on. My steps sounded too loud on the tile. I stayed close to the racks and looked past the end cap. That's when I saw them. 2 men stood near the checkout counter like they had a reason to be there. They weren't wearing uniforms. No polos, no name tags. The older guy, around 50, had a stiff posture, one hand on the counter. The younger one was crouched by the register with his face turned away. The older guy said something low. He had a short gray beard and a baseball cap with the brim pulled tight. He kept looking at the mall gate and then back at the younger guy. The young one was messing with some kind of electronic lock under the counter. A red light blinked, went steady, then blinked again. He adjusted a little device with suction cups on the metal face. I knew right then they weren't employees. I ducked behind a rack of athletic shoes before the older one could turn and see me. I slid my cart backward so it didn't stick out past the end of the aisle. The smell of new rubber was strong in that pocket of space. I crouched and watched through the gaps between shoe boxes. The older man shifted his weight and looked toward the fitting rooms like he knew where everything was. The younger man's tools made small clicks and a soft whine. He wore black gloves. He didn't look up. Both men had backpacks full of tools and seemed to know the store layout pretty well. The younger guy kept at the lock while the older man moved in short loops, checking lines of sight and listening at the gate. The small device on the safe face hummed and flashed. The younger one wiped a cable with his sleeve, then placed it again. He looked calm. He knew what he was doing. The older one watched the hallway clock and tapped the crowbar against his thigh. They weren't panicking or loud. This looked like something they practiced. The older man had the crowbar tucked in his belt under a dark jacket. When he turned, I saw zip ties in a side pocket. The younger one kept checking his watch, counting with his finger by the flashing light. I could hear them talk, only a few words. Times, steps, a name for the safe model. It sounded routine. My phone was back in the storage room on the charger, and I didn't dare leave my spot to go get it. The path back was open tile. If I moved, they would see. I stayed low with a knee on the floor, and my hand on the cartwheel to stop it from rolling. The rubber mat under the register had a raised edge that made a shadow line across the floor. They worked quiet and clean. No extra movement. The older man checked both entrances, then eased a camera dome toward the ceiling with a telescoping magnet. The young one swapped bits on a compact drill and lowered the speed. He set plastic wedges under the panel to mute the vibration. He had done this before. I watched his gloves. They never slipped. He told the older guy to kill the lights over the counter. The older guy used the panel by the office door and the register area went darker. The rest of the store stayed dim. They spoke in low voices about timing and steps. When the younger one said, 30 seconds, the older man rolled his shoulder, breathed out, and stood where he could see the mall gate and the back hall at the same time. My legs started to cramp. I shifted a little so my knee wouldn't pop. A single shoebox edge pressed into my ribs. I focused on small things to keep still. A torn price tag under the rack. A scuff on the tile shaped like a comma. The HVAC cycle switched, and the air grew warmer. I kept my breathing quiet and waited for a chance that didn't come. Minutes slid. The red light on the device went steady, then flashed again. The younger one muttered a number and reset a setting. The older man walked to the end of an aisle, peered down it, then came back. He picked up a pair of socks and set them back so they hit a security tag. He seemed calm, but tight. He was counting seconds in his head. I kept my eyes on their hands. If they started toward the back room, I planned to slip through the stock door and lock it, then take the corridor to the compactor and run. That was my only plan. I didn't think about anything else. I just watched the device and the crowbar and the watch on the younger man's wrist. After about 15 minutes, something went wrong with the electronic lock. A high chirp sounded, then the store's alarm blasted in the ceiling. It shook the glass and made the shoe wall vibrate. The older man cursed loud. The younger one snapped the device off the safe face and stuffed it in his backpack. No arguing. No discussion. They moved at once. They grabbed their backpacks and bolted for the service exit by the stock door. The older man passed 20 feet from me. He didn't look my way. He hit the crash bar with his shoulder. The door jumped open to the gray corridor and bounced. They disappeared into the hall with quick feet. The door eased shut behind them but didn't latch right away. I stayed hidden behind the shoe rack for another 10 minutes, counting by tens with my mouth closed, making sure they were really gone. The alarm kept drilling the air. The red strobes flashed slow in the corners. After a while, the mall alarm joined in down the hall, a different tone. I watched the service door for movement. Nothing. When I finally worked up the courage to come out, the store was empty and loud from the alarm. I checked the front gate and the fitting rooms with a quick glance. No one. I ran straight back to the storage room, grabbed my phone from the charger, and called the police. Then I called Frank. My hands shook, but I hit the right buttons. Within minutes, mall security arrived at the gate, waving a flashlight and yelling for someone to open up. I met them at the service door and let them in. 2 guards, one older, one young, both breathing hard. We moved to the front counter while I tried to explain over the noise. The younger guard pointed at the safe and wrote the time in his book. Then the cops showed, followed by the store manager, Robert Davis, keys in hand, shirt half tucked, hair wet like he left a shower. They shut the alarm panels down after 2 calls to the monitoring line. The quiet after was thick. My ears rang. I stood by my cart with my gloves still on and waited for questions. When they looked around and saw only me, the manager's face tightened. I was the only person they found inside a store that had just been hit. Robert looked at my cart, my keys, the safe panel, then at me. He asked my name and what company. He asked why the back door wasn't latched. I told him it bounced when they ran. He didn't nod. For a minute it felt like I was the suspect. He said, "How do I know you didn't try to pop my register?" I told him to check the cameras. He called the office and had someone pull the feed. I stood still. The officers separated us and took notes. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head, read my ID and wrote the time I called. The cameras backed up my story. You could see me push the cart, then vanish behind the shoes, and later the two men working at the safe. You could see them run. The manager looked at the screen and stopped talking. I gave a detailed description of both men. Gray beard, cap, crowbar and belt. Younger with black gloves, compact drill, small suction device. Their heights, their boots, the way they moved. I still felt a little guilty for not trying to stop them. I said it out loud. Officer Johnson told me, "You did the right thing by staying hidden. Don't risk your life for a register." He asked me to repeat the timeline. I walked him through it, minute by minute, using phone times and the log clipboard by the door. He nodded and wrote everything. The investigation went on for several weeks. I met Robert 2 more times with detectives. They pulled prints from the counter edge and the safe panel. They asked about any staff who might have shared codes. They checked the mall corridor cameras, but the service hall had a blind spot past the ice machine. The men knew it. Nothing solid came back. They never caught the thieves. Insurance covered the panel repair and the lost petty cash. Frank kept me on the schedule. I worked the same nights and the same loop. I walked past that safe many times and saw the thin scratch lines where the wedges had been. 8 months later, the case is still unsolved, and I sometimes wonder if those two moved on to other malls or just found a different line of work. When I was 16 in the summer of 2019, we lived on Maple Avenue outside Austin. Our house sat on a corner lot, and the backyard was wrapped in a wooden fence that was not very tall. Behind the fence ran a strip of grass and a small park with a walking path. From our kitchen window, you could see the swing set through the gaps when the light hit right. The street was quiet most days. It felt safe. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and that summer I noticed small things that did not make sense at first anyway. For about 2 weeks that summer, our back gate kept ending up wide open every morning. Dad locked it tight each night and double-checked it before bed, but somehow it swung out by sunrise. He tested the latch, wiggled the hinges, and told us not to mess with it. He said it was probably kids from the park cutting through, or a gust pushing the boards just right. The wind never opened our trash can lids. The gate was different. I started looking at it from the kitchen window, counting the days it could not seem to stay closed. He bought a heavy-duty padlock and a chain and looped them through the posts. He showed me how the lock clicked shut and tugged twice to be sure. The next morning the gate was open again, chain on the ground, padlock lying in the grass like someone set it there. Dad walked the fence line, shaking each panel and checking the screws. He crouched by the latch and rubbed his thumb over a dark mark in the wood. He did not say much. He just said, "We'll figure it out," like it was a problem that belonged to him. We had a big above-ground pool set on a level bed of sand and a wooden gazebo beside it where we spent most evenings. The gazebo held 2 lawn chairs, a table with a ring from cold cans, and a string of lights that looked nice after dark. On the fence side, the boards were bleached and warm to the touch. The pool was round and blue, with a ladder that rattled if you climbed. On hot nights, my parents sat in the gazebo and talked while my sister and I floated, chasing bugs that landed in the water. That Sunday afternoon, the heat sat heavy on the street, and even the oak leaves barely moved. We ate lunch, and my visiting grandfather fell asleep in Dad's recliner with the TV on low. My mom and Dad took naps too, doors cracked to keep the house cool. My older sister Amy went to a friend's pool party across town, so the house was quiet for once. I was restless and sticky from mowing a strip of the front yard earlier. I filled a water bottle, grabbed my towel, and decided to go for a swim to cool off alone. I slid open the back door and stepped onto the concrete. The step was hot, and the white paint on the railing flaked in little curls. I set the raft by the ladder and dipped my foot. The water felt clean and a little cloudy from yesterday's sunscreen. The chain on the gate was looped through, the padlock was on, and the latch sat flat. I checked it without thinking, then left it alone. I climbed down into the pool and let the water come up to my shoulders. The sun hit the side of my face, and I breathed. Mom had closed all the blinds and locked the back door before lying down, which was her usual routine. I had been swimming for about 30 minutes when I noticed someone standing behind our fence near the park. The sun was bright and in my eyes, so I could not make out any details about the person. Just a darker shape through the gaps near where the path curved. I raised my hand to block the glare and squinted. The figure did not move, and then it did. A small shift like someone changing feet near the corner fence post. I figured it was someone walking a dog or passing through the park area. People cut the corner all the time. The path ran close behind our lot, and the fence was low enough that you could see heads and shoulders. I waited another second, and the shape seemed to turn away. There was a soft scrape, like a shoe on dirt, and then nothing. The figure disappeared after a minute, and I went back to floating around on my inflatable raft. I let my feet trail in the water and pushed with my heels to keep the raft centered. I drifted slowly toward the gazebo, nudged the side of the pool with my foot, and pushed back out again. I flipped onto my back and closed my eyes, letting the raft rock under me. Warm water lapped against my ears. The smell of chlorine mixed with cut grass from somebody's yard nearby. Somewhere a drill buzzed once and stopped. A plane ghosted high overhead that I could not see. I let my arms hang in the water and listened, counting breaths and the tiny taps the raft made against the pool wall when a ripple rolled across the surface. The sounds of a Sunday afternoon spread across the block. Distant lawnmowers hummed past the trees. Birds chirped from the power lines and hopped along the fence. A car rolled through the stop sign at the corner and kept going. From a house down the block, a radio muttered a country song I could only catch in pieces. A delivery truck clunked over the speed bump and faded. The boards of the fence warmed in the sun. I felt the heat on my face and the cool on my legs. Everything felt completely normal and safe in my own backyard. The crack hit so sharp I thought a branch blew off the oak. I opened my eyes and turned my head toward the fence. A board flexed and splintered near the top rail. A man was already halfway over, shoe on the middle support, hands gripping the capboard. He swung a leg and dropped into our yard like he had practiced. He was thin, average height, in dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low so I could not see his eyebrows. He did not look around. He just started walking toward the pool, steady and sure, like he knew this place. For a few seconds, my brain lagged. People do not just climb fences in broad daylight while the sun is on everything. He kept coming, shoes quiet on the grass, shoulders square, head angled down so the brim hit his face. Reality hit me. I rolled off the raft and went under hard, the chlorine stinging my nose. I kicked toward the ladder, but I was in the center and the raft spun into me. The water felt heavy, like my arms had weights. I forced my head up and gulped air and went again. The ladder clinked against the pool wall from a ripple. He reached the gazebo steps and paused, eyes on me, hands loose at his sides. I pushed the raft away and clawed along the top rail toward the ladder. The sun flashed on the water and made everything look white and flat. I kicked the ladder with my knee and grabbed the handholds. My foot slipped on the third rung and I banged my shin, but I got my weight up and over. I could hear my breath too loud. The deck boards were hot and rough on my bare feet. I ran straight for the back door, water hitting my calves and splashing behind me. By the time I reached the mat, he had circled off the steps and was taking the 2 gazebo stairs in one measured stride. He moved like he had a plan he practiced in his head 100 times. He did not hurry. He did not speak. His face stayed calm, mouth flat, eyes unreadable under the cap. I gripped the back door handle and pulled. It did not give. The deadbolt was set. I slapped the glass with my palm, and then both hands, and yelled for help. The sound bounced off the kitchen tile and came back at me. I hit the glass again and again, shouting, "Mom! Mom! Open!" My fingers slipped on the metal. The lock would not move from outside. Behind me, I could feel him closing the space, steps on wood that did not creak. I did not turn. I kept hitting the pane with the side of my fist and screamed until my throat scraped. The house stayed quiet for a beat too long. The man stopped a few feet behind me. I felt his presence like heat on the back of my neck and shoulders. He stood there, still. No noise from him at all. Footsteps thumped fast from the hall. The deadbolt clicked. The door pulled inward and my mom's arm hooked my wrist and yanked me across the threshold. I stumbled on wet feet and slid on the tile. She shoved the door closed. Her hand snapped the lock. When I turned, he was standing 2 feet from the glass, close enough to fog the pane with a breath, but he did not breathe hard. He looked at us with flat eyes that did not track around the kitchen, just focused on the space between us and the frame. He did not try the handle. My dad hit the bottom stair loud enough to shake a picture. He saw the man and shouldered the door open again, pushing past me. He was barefoot and in a t-shirt and gym shorts. He went straight out on the step and pointed. "Get off my property," he said, voice low and hard. "Now." The man's mouth twitched like he was thinking about a word, but he did not use it. My grandpa's voice came from the living room, steady, speaking to 911, giving our address, saying, "There's a man in our yard right now." Mom kept one arm on my shoulder and one hand on her phone. Water dripped off me and made a slick on the tile. The man did not look at Dad's face. He looked at Dad's chest like he was measuring distance. For a second, I braced for him to move fast or to grab for something. He didn't. He turned without a word and walked the same unhurried pace to the back gate. He never looked at the windows of the second floor or the kitchen door. He never glanced at the camera light by the porch because there was not one yet. He reached the gate and stopped. Dad took a step after him but held at the gazebo like he did not want to corner a stranger. The man put his hand in his right pocket and brought out a small key ring. He chose a single key with a black plastic head, slotted it into our brand new padlock, and turned. The shackle popped clean. He caught it in his palm like he did not want to drop it. He lifted the chain off the posts, opened the gate wide enough to pass, stepped through, and set it back. He closed the gate and locked it again with the same key. He never looked back. He cut across the strip of grass behind the fence and took the path to the left, toward the small playground. He disappeared behind the live oak 6 yards away. Dad stood at the steps with his fists open and his jaw tight, like he was forcing himself not to chase. Mom pressed the door closed again and locked it and put the chain on, even though the chain did not do much. She moved me to the rug and put a towel around my shoulders. I could hear Grandpa repeating details to the dispatcher. Thin male, dark clothes, baseball cap, used a key. We waited. Our clock said 20 minutes by the time 2 patrol cars turned onto Maple and rolled to a stop at the curb. The officers came through the side gate Dad opened for them. They took one look at the back gate and the chain and the lock. One put on gloves and checked the hasp. He ran a finger over the latchboard and the screws. No pry marks, no shavings of metal. He wrote notes on a small pad. The other asked Dad to show the key. Dad held up his ring. The officer asked, "Any other copies?" Dad said, "Just the spare in the kitchen drawer." Mom brought the spare key from the drawer. The officer compared it to the lock and nodded. He said, "No signs of tampering." He asked the brand and when we bought it. Dad said last week, in the blister pack, with the receipt still in the bag in the pantry trash. They asked if anyone had been hired for yard work or repairs. Dad said no. They walked the fence line and the park strip and the slope down to the path. One used a flashlight to look at the top rail and the cut splintered board. He snapped 2 photos with his phone and measured the scuff from a shoe. They took our statements in the kitchen, one by one. I told them exactly how he moved and how he watched first and then acted. Mom told them about the blinds and the doors. Grandpa repeated what he told dispatch. Dad gave them the lot number and mentioned the gate had been open mornings. They said they would increase patrols near the park and loop the street more often. They suggested motion lights and a camera by the porch and the gate line. The younger officer said, "He wanted you to see the key." He wrote down the padlock model and our case number. By evening, Dad had 2 hardware bags on the counter. He installed a metal cross brace on the gate, a new latch guard, and 2 longer screws in the posts. He mounted a camera under the eave that pointed at the gate and set up the app on Mom's phone and his. He put the spare key in a different drawer. We watched the live view for a long time and did not see anyone. Neighbors walked their dogs and looked over like they had heard already. The park got quiet when the light fell. The fence showed a dark line against the path. Days went by, and the patrol car rolled past 3 times a day, sometimes more. The lock stayed closed each morning. The chain hung straight. The camera caught raccoons and a feral cat and a kid chasing a basketball, but no one stopped at our fence. I kept checking the timestamps anyway. We never saw the man again. That did not change the part where he knew the lock and had a key that fit. I thought about the package at the store, sealed tight, and the 2 keys in the plastic. I still wonder how long he had been watching our family and planning his way into our yard. My sister Carol works as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital downtown. During nursing school, she did rotations at different facilities around the city with her classmates. Recently, she told me about her friend Amanda's experience during a clinical rotation at a small rehabilitation clinic on the outskirts of Springfield. It was a 30-bed place that specialized in elderly recovery and physical therapy. Amanda was on the night shift, making rounds and checking patients as part of her training. That Saturday night, her ward only had 12 patients, so the halls felt especially quiet and empty. The long corridors seemed to stretch forever under the fluorescent lights at 3 in the morning. Amanda liked the routine. She checked oxygen tubing, straightened blankets, and logged vitals on a shared tablet. The clinic used old wall clocks that ticked loud when everything else went still. The vents made a thin whistle, like air slipping through a gap. In most rooms, the TVs were off and the shades were halfway down. Parking lot lamps showed through the slats. A nurse aide pushed a linen cart past her once, wheels rattling, then turned a corner and the noise died. It was the kind of shift where even a phone vibrating felt too loud. Near room 228, she paused to read a sticky note about a fall risk. Yellow socks on? Call bell in reach. She lined up a chair against the wall and moved on. In room 231, a man with a new hip asked for water. She held his cup while he sipped, then wrote the intake. No one was agitated. No alarms went off. Her steps echoed on the waxed floor and faded as she turned a corner. She noticed the sharp smell of antiseptic and the faint sweet lotion they all used on dry hands. By 2:45, she was almost done with the scheduled checks. She watched a chest rise and fall, listened to a soft snore, tucked in a blanket that had slid. She kept her voice low when she thanked a woman for letting her take the pressure. At a window, she looked over the dark edge of the parking lot and saw nothing moving. Security lights threw white shapes across the asphalt. A moth hit the glass and fell. Amanda finished her list and turned back toward the station. Deborah and Sue were at the nurses' station updating charts and talking about the schedule for next week. The station sat like a square island in the middle of the floor with blue chairs, a humming computer, and binders stacked on a shelf. Their coffee cups left brown rings on a paper towel they used as a coaster. "You're done?" Deborah asked without looking up. The digital clock above the med room flipped from 3:07 to 3:08 slowly. Amanda said the 12 were stable and pulled up a stool. The printer spit out a page and then went quiet again. Suddenly, the red call light above room 237 started flashing. The panel over the desk buzzed and the number glowed while a soft chime sounded 3 times. A small red dot lit on the unit map in the West Wing. It was the ordinary call for help, not a code. The problem was, room 237 had been empty for 2 weeks since the last patient was discharged. The room was being prepared for renovation and wasn't in use. Maintenance had left a card outside earlier, and the dry erase board was blank. Deborah suggested it might be a malfunction with the call system, or maybe someone from maintenance had bumped the button. She said the system acted up sometimes. Sue said facilities hadn't been on the unit since 11, and that the bed in there was unplugged. She checked a list on the screen and found nothing listed for that room. The light kept flashing. The chime went again, and the red number stayed lit above the desk. No one moved for a few seconds. Amanda watched the panel and then glanced down the empty hall toward that wing. She pictured the door to 237, closed all week and marked for work. Deborah reached for the phone like she might call the on-call facilities tech, then hesitated. Waking someone at 3 in the morning for a likely glitch wasn't popular. The light kept blinking, bright and steady in the middle of the board. Amanda did not like leaving it for morning. She thought about how it would look on the log if the call light stayed unanswered and someone had to write a note later. She also thought about how simple it would be to walk down, check the door, and come back. Her rounds were finished. Her legs were still warm from walking. Deborah had a line half written in the schedule book. Sue was watching the screen and waiting for nothing to change. Amanda stood, ready to end the guessing in the simplest way. "I can go look," Amanda said. Deborah seemed relieved and said they could go together after she finished writing the line she was on. Sue said she would keep an eye on the panel while they checked. The buzzing paused, then resumed again. The red number didn't change. The map still showed that single dot in the West Wing. The call light stayed red. Amanda touched the small flashlight in her pocket out of habit and left it there because the hallway lights were bright. She told them she would be quick. She didn't raise her voice. The station computer hummed. The paper calendar lay open under Deborah's hand. Amanda's stool rolled back an inch when her knee brushed it, and she steadied it without thinking. She nodded once, simple and calm. "I'll go check it out," she said, already turning her focus to the empty room number glowing on the board. No one objected. Amanda volunteered to go check out what was happening rather than wait to be assigned the task. Amanda walked down the west hallway toward the far room where Mr. Thompson had stayed, while recovering from a hip fracture before his discharge. Past the last occupied door, the unit felt different. Cooler air, louder vent noise, brighter shine on the waxed floor. The sign outside 237 was blank, and the dry erase board was empty. A maintenance cart leaned against the wall with a coiled extension cord, blue tape, and a folded dust sheet. She checked the door, listened, and went in with her small flashlight still in her pocket. Inside was nothing unusual. A hospital bed without linens sat centered on the floor, powered off but plugged into the wall. The mattress had a plastic cover and a bare bedside table stood next to it. No personal items, no chartboard, No cup at the sink. Shades were down halfway. Parking lot lights painted faint bars across the tile. The room smelled like dust and disinfectant. She stepped to the head of the bed and checked the call button. It hung in its normal bracket next to where the headboard would be. She pressed the call button once, then again, watching for the small indicator to blink. It lit up like it should. From down the hall, she heard the distant chime from the nurse's station. She pressed it a third time just to be sure. The signal went through every time. She imagined one of the cleaning staff had passed by, mopped the doorway, and bumped it earlier when the cable swung. It was a simple explanation. She walked around the bed once, checked the floor, and headed to the door to leave. Before stepping out, she reached for the handle to pull it closed behind her, and felt resistance. She tried again. The handle turned, but the latch did not release. She twisted clockwise and pushed. Nothing. She turned the other way and pulled. Still nothing. She slid the key in and turned it, listening for a click. No change. She could feel the lever rotate smooth in her hand, but the door stayed firm in the frame. It felt stuck or jammed, like the bolt was riding wrong in the strike plate. She set her shoulder to it and pushed in a steady way. The frame creaked a little, like wood flexing, but the panel did not shift. She checked the hinges and saw old paint ridges along the knuckles. She laid the key ring on the bedside table to free both hands and pulled hard. The handle rotated smooth, but the door did not move. No gap at the jamb, no give. The hallway outside was silent. She did not want to yell right away and wake patients 2 doors down. She tried again with more force, bracing one foot against the floor, then bumping with her shoulder. The impact was dull, and the door bounced her off. She took her small flashlight, shined it at the latch, and saw the bolt sitting flush, but not retracting fully when the handle turned. In older buildings like that clinic, things shifted. Frames warped and parts stuck. She had heard staff say that many times, but the door had opened easily 5 minutes earlier. She rapped the wood with her knuckles, then started knocking, short and firm at first, then louder. "Deborah," she called once, then again. Her voice sounded flat in the empty room. She tried the call button on the wall once more out of habit, even though it only reached the station panel. She decided to make steady noise, not frantic, so someone would notice and come check. She counted to 30 and hit the door with the palm of her hand in a simple pattern. After a few minutes, the hallway brought back an answering sound, quick footsteps, and then a voice through the door. Deborah said, "You in there?" Amanda said yes. The lock would not release. Deborah tried the handle from the outside. The knob turned, and the latch slipped back like normal. The door moved. The panel swung open toward Deborah without effort. Amanda stepped back so she would not get hit by the edge. Just like that, the opening was clear from the hallway side. Amanda picked up her keyring and stood in the doorway while they both looked at the latch face. Deborah worked it a few times and felt nothing strange from her side. From Amanda's side, it had bound up like a seized part. Deborah said they should call the on-call maintenance now, not wait for morning, and Amanda agreed. They walked back to the station. Sue had watched the board and seen the light clear when Amanda pressed the wall button earlier. She noted the time. The emergency maintenance tech arrived in work boots and a gray polo with a badge clipped to his belt. He brought a small tool bag and a flashlight longer than Amanda's. He checked the strike plate, removed the handle set with a screwdriver, and looked at the spindle. He tightened 2 screws and then opened and closed the door 10 times. The problem followed the inside lever, not the outside. He said the wooden frame had probably swelled from the humidity that week and pushed the latch at an angle, so the bolt dragged. He sanded the frame edge lightly, added a thin shim behind the plate, and sprayed a dry lubricant into the mechanism. He showed them the rub mark where the latch had scraped the metal. "It will open both ways now," he said, and tested it 3 more times from each side. Deborah signed his work order, and he told them to put in a ticket to replace the older hardware in that wing. He said the magnetic systems the main hospital used were better for this kind of problem. He packed his tools and left the unit quiet again. Amanda kept working, but she was more shaken than a simple malfunction should have caused. She avoided the far end of the ward when she could, and when she had to go there, she moved fast and kept her eyes on Dr. Hardware. The next week, she asked the supervisor to switch to days, saying the hours would fit her classes better. The request was practical, and it went through. Administration followed up on the facilities ticket. A vendor came in and replaced the old latch sets with modern magnetic units that released under pressure and did not depend on a lever cam. Over 2 nights, the hall smelled like new metal and sawdust. The maintenance tech showed the nurses how the new hardware worked and pointed out a small indicator that changed when the door was closed. He said this model would not jam the same way. Later, Amanda told Carol she had a panic attack while she was stuck in 237. She kept it simple. Her chest went tight, her arms felt heavy, and she had to count to steady her hands. She did not think of herself as claustrophobic, but the door not moving and the quiet room started it. The stress from nights and the way the unit went silent at 3 in the morning probably pushed it over. That sounded reasonable to me. Carol said student nurses get hit hard their first months. The responsibility adds weight even when nothing is wrong. She said Amanda did the right things: test the system, call for help, and write it up. The important part was not pretending it had not happened. She reminded me that buildings like that have quirks you only find at bad hours. Amanda stayed through her rotation and then moved to a bigger hospital for her next round. She handled day shifts better. She was still careful with doors. She waited for the latch click before taking a step, and she never set her keys down in a room with a heavy door. It was not superstition. It was a simple habit you keep after a scare that makes sense to keep. In the end, it was a small thing, fixed by a person with a tool bag. But at 3 in the morning, a small thing can grow fast in a quiet ward. The clinic did not want any repeats, so they put the change order through for the whole wing and added it to the log. The important thing was that they fixed the mechanical issue, so no other staff members would get stuck in patient rooms. My name is Marcus Johnson. In 2020, I was 28 and living in Springfield, Oregon. 4 years ago, I had just come out of a messy breakup with my girlfriend, Kelly. We moved there from Portland for her tech job. When it fell apart, she kept our house on Oak Street. I found a basement apartment fast. The windows were at ground level, so all I saw were ankles and shoes sliding past. It felt bleak, but my sales manager salary couldn't do better. Kelly kept calling those weeks, texting late, begging me to come back and work things out. The building was old, with steam pipes that hissed and a hallway smell of bleach and wet carpet. My ceiling had brown stains shaped like islands. I kept clothes in plastic bins because the closet felt damp. I slid a rubber mat under the bed. The kitchen was a narrow strip, 2 burners, a stubborn mini fridge. I set my laptop on a wobbling thrift store table and told my boss I'd work remote. He wanted weekly reports and the same numbers. Nights, I stared at the blinds and listened to footsteps above me moving past like slow, dragging tides. Night. On Saturdays, I drove past Oak Street out of habit. I didn't stop. Her car sat clean under the trees, and sometimes a soggy package waited on the porch. I pictured her barefoot at the kitchen island, focused on code, the plant in the window still alive. Then I'd circle back to my low ceiling and the constant shuffle over my windows. You learn patterns in a basement. Who walks a dog? Who drags a suitcase? When someone slows, the The sound changes, a different weight in the pause. I told myself it was nothing and kept my head down anyway. About a month after the split, the weather turned hard. 3 straight days of rain hammered the gutters. The courtyard drain made a sucking noise and then quit. Water crept down the hallway in a thin sheet you could step over if you moved quick. The power went out across the block and stayed off. The building turned quiet in a strange way. Even the fridge stopped its little clicks. Cell service kept dropping, and my phone battery dipped red. I set a candle on a saucer and sat at the kitchen table with printed reports and a pen open. The candle burned low and dripped down the side in pale ropes. Wind pushed through the seams and made the tiny flame lean. Somewhere upstairs, a door kept banging as the gusts shifted. I kept circling numbers and writing notes in the margins, page after page. When the water stopped inching under my door, I relaxed a little and kept working. Then I heard glass break outside. Not a plate and not a bottle. It sounded like a window, sharp and final, followed by the roll of smaller pieces. I sat still and listened to the storm breathe and wait. My apartment sat below ground level, and the little courtyard outside the window was a concrete bowl with a strip of muddy grass. From the table, I couldn't see anything but the lower frame. I stood up slowly and moved to the blinds. Another small pop followed, metal on metal, deliberate, not random. I lifted one slat with 2 fingers. Rain streaked across the glass in diagonal lines. At first, I saw only puddles and leaves pinned to the wall. Then a shape shifted against the window well. Someone lay on the ground, pressed close to the foundation, and watching. The figure wore all black. Hoodie pulled tight, pants soaked and stuck to the legs, gloves dark as the rain. The shoes left prints on the concrete lip. For a second, I thought they had slipped in the storm and crawled there. People drink during power cuts. People fall. But the elbows were tucked in like a mechanic under a car, and the hands were busy. The right hand brought up a small tool, thin like a flat screwdriver. The left felt along the base of my window, patient. The movements were careful and measured, not frantic and not drunk. I shifted half a step back so the candle wouldn't throw my outline onto the blinds. The tool slid under the metal rail and paused. Tap, tap. The body moved an inch to the right to get leverage. A faint scrape transferred through the frame into the drywall, the kind of sound you only know if you live this close to the ground. Water beaded on the hood and ran in sheets. There was no wasted motion. They probed the latch again, backed off, and set a better angle. My breath fogged the glass at the seam and faded fast. My heart beat hard, but I kept still. I slid my hand along the wall until I found the light switch and made sure it was down. No power anyway, but I didn't want a silhouette on the blinds. I glanced at my phone. 9% battery, no bars. The person switched grip and wiped the handle on a sleeve. The gloves looked rubberized across the palms, hardware store kind. One knee left a wet print as they adjusted. The other hand settled on the glass at my eye level, and I lowered the slat fast enough to make it click. I held my breath until the next scrape started. The movements were cleaner now. The point found the latch again. Slow pressure. A small flex in the frame. Rain hammered the courtyard and the drain gurgled like a throat clearing. I stayed on the balls of my feet and didn't move. The candle leaned in a draft and then steadied. Outside in the dark, the tool tapped home with a patient rhythm. There was nothing random about it. It was steady, practiced, and close. I stayed there, silent, as I watched this person systematically working on breaking into my home. I blew out the candle to see past glare better. The room went dark, and the storm felt closer outside. A shape lay low outside, working the window frame patiently. A thin tool slid under the rail and twisted slowly. The lock flexed, held, then creaked again under measured pressure. I lifted one blind slat and watched through a slit. They were forcing my window from outside in the rain. Panic rose, but I moved on habit more than thought. I grabbed my phone and tapped Kelly's name immediately again. A bright screen lit inches from the glass, lighting gloves. I heard "Shape of You" over rain from inches away. My call went to voicemail, and the screen died instantly. I called again, and the same thing happened again immediately. Flash, ringtone, silence. The tool dug in harder afterward again. No doubt left. It was Kelly under my window working. Same ringtone as always, same stutter before the chorus started. She lay in mud with a flat bar tool steady. I said her name through the glass, got nothing back. I raised my voice and told her to stop now. She ignored me and levered the tip under latch deeper. I said, "I'm calling the cops, loud and clear now." She froze, slid back, stood, and ran into rain hard. I waited 30 seconds and then called 911 right away. Break-in attempt, suspect known, power out, address given calmly. The dispatcher said officers were en route quickly to me. I checked the other window and slid the deadbolt secure. About 15 minutes later, 2 cruisers rolled into the lot. Their lights bounced off wet siding and flooded the courtyard. I opened the door and led them to windows immediately. They crouched low and inspected the lower track closely together. A gloved finger traced fresh pry marks across scarred aluminum. Another officer stepped out and measured shoe prints carefully nearby. They asked timing, phone, power. I answered in order plainly. They asked who I believed it was tonight, I said. I gave Kelly's name and the Oak Street address directly. I described ringtone, screen glow, clothes, tool, and position outside. One officer wrote the song title down exactly as evidence. They said they would go talk to her right away. I waited inside with my back to the wall, listening. Rain eased to a hiss while I checked the door. They returned later and asked me for the timeline again. They asked if anyone else used that exact ringtone anywhere. I said no and waited for their response in silence. They said Kelly was home and dry when contacted tonight. She said she was there all evening with David watching. Movies were listed with times. David confirmed every detail calmly. He said he never left and they ate pizza together. I told the officers it was a lie for sure. I described the hood, gloves, and how she holds phones. They listened, but the ground felt like it shifted under. They asked if I had video or recordings available tonight. Power cut my Wi-Fi and my small camera earlier. My battery was low, and I had not recorded anything. They walked the courtyard again with flashlights and looked around. Rain softened the edges on prints before they finished checking. They took my statement and said they would follow up. The worst part was explaining the ringtone again to them. They said Kelly's phone had been broken for days recently. She showed volume at 0 and said it made nothing. David backed her story about a silent phone all week. Without physical proof, the case was thin to them, unfortunately. They said pry marks showed attempt, but who did it? I watched water drip from their jackets while they left. Word moved fast through town by the next morning already. The landlord heard I was drunk and yelling her name. At Main Street Coffee, the barista kept a tight smile. A neighbor asked if everything was okay with Kelly lately. My boss called about numbers, warned me about personal drama. I had not posted anything, but someone else talked plenty. The power returned, but the building felt different afterward inside. I kept both windows latched and set dowels and tracks. Every shoe scrape outside made me check the blinds again. I filed the report copy and called for updates twice. No updates ever came from the non-emergency line operator. Her story became the town's story, and mine disappeared quickly. People said I could not accept the breakup at all. People said I tried ruining her new relationship with lies. David started showing up at my grocery, standing close, silent. They called me the crazy ex who would not quit. HR emailed the complaints about my behavior created concerns internally. Sales dipped, calls got colder, clients drifted away gradually quietly. A client asked if I was okay, then left anyway. I stayed late to pull numbers up, got nowhere fast. In a week I was on a plan at work. In 2 weeks I quit and returned my badge willingly. I boxed my lamp and files and carried them downstairs. The hallway smelled like bleach again and felt empty tonight. The courtyard drain kept its slow ring of mud circling. I thought about fighting, but I had no ground anywhere. No video, no witness, just a song and pry marks. I called the precinct again and got the same answer. Nothing they could do without more, they said flatly tonight. People acted like they saw me invent the whole thing. Stares replaced nods and conversations stopped when I entered places. Kelly looked like the victim and made me the villain. I packed clothes into bins and stacked them by doors. My mother said I could come home to Portland anytime. My father offered the truck. I said yes right away. I turned in keys, skipped arguments about the deposit entirely. I moved back to Portland to stay with my parents. My stepfather Richard died of a stroke in April at 72. He married my mom when I was 14 and became the steady parent I could count on. He worked long days at Johnson's Auto Repair, came home with grease on his sleeves, and still made time to fix leaking sinks, hang blinds, or drive me to practice. When he didn't show up for breakfast one morning, my mother knocked on the bathroom door and found him on the floor. The EMTs said it was fast. By the time I reached the hospital, it was over. We planned the funeral by habit more than thought. Mom is 80 and had early signs of dementia before any of this. She can still cook and dress herself, but sometimes loses words, sometimes repeats the same question 3 times in 10 minutes. After the doctor talked to us, he warned that a hard shock could speed things up. He talked about routine, daylight, and rest. We tried to follow directions. We took turns staying for dinner, cleaned the fridge, labeled pill bottles, and made a list of numbers by the phone. The first week after the funeral, she surprised me. She kept busy with small tasks. She folded towels, stacked old receipts, circled dates on a calendar Richard kept by the phone. Neighbors dropped off casseroles. I returned a few of Richard's tools to the shop and found a photo of him in front of the blue Chevy he rebuilt last summer. When I came back, Mom was in her chair with the TV remote lined up exactly with the edge of the side table. She said she was tired but fine. I believed her. Then the calls started. They came after midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning. At first it was, "Can you talk? I can't sleep." 2 nights later she whispered, "Somebody is in the kitchen." I asked her what she heard. "Walkin'," she said, "and the water." I told her to stay in her room, keep the door closed, and I would drive over. By the time I got there, the house was quiet. The kitchen tile was cold under my feet. The faucet was off. A thin ring of water showed in the sink like someone had rinsed a glass and left. I told myself it was from dinner. I drove over with my husband Dave twice to make sure. The first night we pulled up at 1:40 a.m. The porch light was on, the deadbolt set on the front door. Her house is a 1-story ranch with a narrow hallway, 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom in the middle, and a kitchen that faces the backyard. We checked every window and door. The back slider was locked. The stick Richard cut for the track was in place. I ran my finger over the dust on the windowsill and saw my own line. Dave looked under the beds, inside the hall closet, behind the dresser where Mom keeps blankets. Nothing moved, nothing missing. Mom kept saying she was sure. She pointed at the sink and the stove like they were suspects. "He turned the water," she said. "He stood right there." We didn't argue with her. Dave checked the basement even though it's just a crawl space with a vent and a light bulb you pull by a string. The hatch was closed. The screws looked undisturbed. I stood in the hallway and listened. The hum of the refrigerator. The tick of the hallway thermostat. My own breath. I walked the perimeter of the house with a flashlight while Dave stayed inside. The fence gate was latched. The garbage bins were upright with the lids on. I told her we would come back the next night just to be safe. The second night felt more thorough because we knew where to look. I brought a small notepad to write down anything that looked off so we wouldn't go in circles. We got there around 2. The locks were secure. The front window latch was still taped from last winter when Richard had worried it might pop open in wind. The tape was unbroken. The bathroom had a low nightlight. Mom said, "He turned the water in here too." I felt the faucet. Dry. I twisted it on and off to feel the play in the handle. It squeaked and left my fingers a little wet from condensation around the base. In the mirror, I could see the towel bar Richard installed a year ago, perfectly level. We opened the medicine cabinet and counted bottles to keep our hands busy. Blood pressure, vitamin D, a new sleep aid the neurologist had prescribed 2 weeks earlier. I wrote the names down and the doses we understood. Back in the kitchen, Dave opened the fridge. The light came on. He looked at me because a plate of sliced apples was on the top shelf in plastic wrap. That was normal. The milk had today's date, still cold. On the counter, a ceramic bowl held 2 keys on a ring, the spare car key and the back door key Richard had labeled with blue tape. The bowl had a chip on the rim. I walked my fingers around the chip without thinking, and then stopped. Mom was watching me like I had a test. I told her we'd sit a while. We made tea. The clock on the stove clicked over to 3 cool, and nothing happened. Dave walked the hallway again. I thought the sounds were grief and medicine. That morning, I called the neurologist's office to ask if the new pills could cause what she was describing. The nurse said dementia can cause sounds that are not there, especially with stress and bad sleep, and told me to keep routine, add light, and call if she wandered. On the 3rd night, Mom called earlier, just after 11, and said, "Please stay." We drove over. The streets were empty. A porch light flickered. She waited in her robe. I checked doors, then unplugged the TV, checked stove knobs, moved a chair from hallway, turned on a lamp, and set a glass of water by her chair. I decided to sleep on the living room couch to put her mind at ease. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to voices in the kitchen. I thought the TV had turned on, but the plug was out. I remembered what Mom said about someone in the house. I listened. The sound was low, like 2 people passed the doorway. The stove clock showed 3:02. I slid off the couch and set my feet on the carpet. I moved slow. I stepped into the hallway with my back to the wall. The bathroom nightlight threw a weak square on the floor. The house looked the same. At the kitchen entrance, I stopped. The overhead light was on. Mom sat at the table in her nightgown with her hands clasped. She was talking to the empty chair across from her. Her eyes were open but not focused. She said she had to pick up dry cleaning at 9, then asked if he wanted pancakes or oatmeal. She smiled and nodded like she got an answer. She talked about a trip to the lake years ago, the loose step at the cabin, the metal rowboat that leaked. Then she paused and tilted her head like she was listening. She nodded again and went on about tomorrow. She asked if the oil change could wait. I stood in the doorway, and watched the clock move to 3:05. The sink was empty. The back door was closed, the wooden stick still in the track. The chair across from her had the cushion Richard used to sit on. It was just a cushion on wood. She reached toward the chair as if passing something, then pulled her hand back and gave a small smile. My chest felt tight. I stepped in, and the floor creaked. She didn't flinch. She kept talking about a drive along the coast and which route was faster. When she said his name, it was soft. She waited, then nodded. I went to the counter and stood still. I could smell dish soap. I watched her mouth form answers to nothing. When I got closer, Mom turned and smiled. She said Richard had finally come home from work. She pointed to the empty chair and asked why I wasn't saying hello. I told her I needed a minute. She frowned. I sat opposite her and looked at the chair. I said his name once. I tried to explain. I said he passed in April. I said we had the funeral together. Her mouth went hard, and she shook her head. "Don't do that," she said. "He is right here." She grabbed my hand and squeezed like I was a child. I told her the truth again because I wanted to stop this cleanly. She raised her voice and called me a liar. She told me to stop being ridiculous. She turned toward the chair and put her hand out like she was calming him. Her condition had jumped in days. This was not waking confusion. It was firm. I did not push more. I made tea and asked if she wanted some. She said he already got her one and tapped the table by the empty place setting that wasn't there. I sat with her until the sky lightened. She went to bed for 2 hours. In the morning, I called the neurologist and asked for the first opening. They had a cancellation at 10:30 with Dr. Miller. I got Mom dressed in a sweater and shoes with Velcro straps. She asked 3 times if Richard was driving. I said I would drive. In the waiting room, she stared at the clock and then at the door. The nurse took her blood pressure and wrote notes. We went into a small office with diplomas and a stack of test booklets on a side table. Dr. Miller spoke calmly and asked her to remember 3 words. He asked her to draw a clock and set the hands to 11:10. She drew the circle too big and stacked numbers on one side. He asked what day it was and where we were. She guessed a Tuesday and looked at me. He asked about sleep, food, and the new medication. He listened while I described the night. He checked reflexes and had her follow his finger with her eyes. He said it was acute dementia with psychotic elements. He explained that severe grief can trigger a fast drop in older patients. He adjusted medications, added one for agitation, and wrote a plan for supervision. He told me to consider full-time help at home or a facility because the risk of wandering and unsafe behavior rises with these symptoms. I booked a follow-up. For 2 weeks, I tried to cover days and nights with family and neighbors. I set alarms and put a door chime on the front door. She kept asking where Richard was. She set 2 plates at dinner and would not touch hers. She walked to the garage and jiggled the handle to a car that no longer worked. She called the police to report her husband missing, then forgot she made the call. I decided I could not keep her safe alone. Mom spent her last 4 months in a memory care facility with round-the-clock supervision. The building was clean, with short halls and wide doors, a code pad at exits, and a nurse's station in the middle. Her room had a twin bed, a dresser, and a small corkboard. I brought her photos and the throw blanket from her chair. The first week, she knew my name. The second week, she called me by my aunt's name. After that, she smiled to be polite. Her dementia moved fast. She walked the corridors with a small shuffle, stopping to look into doorways. She asked anyone in scrubs if Richard had called. Staff told me she had conversations with empty space during meals, then refused to eat because she was waiting. I sat with her and lifted a fork and she kept her lips closed. Later, she hid dinner rolls in her cardigan pocket to give to him. At night, she stood by the window and said he would pull into the driveway. In November, the facility called and said she fell asleep after lunch and didn't wake. When I arrived, her room was quiet. Her hands lay folded on the blanket. Dr. Miller said this course can happen after deep loss at her age. I signed papers. I sat in the parking lot with the folder on my lap. I still regret not pushing sooner, but I am grateful she is no longer confused and searching for Richard. I was working night shifts at the Burger King off Interstate 40 for about 2 years when this happened. The store sat right off the exit, wedged between a gas station and a motel with a broken ice machine. We got truckers, highway cops, and drunk college kids chasing salt at 2 in the morning. It always smelled like fryer oil and burnt coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed. October air came through the automatic doors every time they opened and made the paper napkins lift like they wanted to fly. That day had started bad. My car died on me that morning, and I spent almost 3 hours riding buses across town to make it in by 10. My husband stayed home with our baby who had a fever, so I couldn't take his truck. I came in tired and already annoyed. The drive-through headsets were glitching. The shake machine needed cleaning. I told myself to get through the shift and try to sleep on the bus ride home. By 2:30, the lobby was empty. The big menu screens reflected on the tiled floor. I wiped the counter and restocked ketchup packets. Ricardo, my coworker, walked to the back to check on a delivery we were expecting. He waved his hand like, 2 minutes, I got it. The fryer hissed in the quiet. I could hear highway noise through the glass, a steady hiss like wind. The bell over the door chimed and a man walked in. I felt weird as soon as I saw him. He was maybe mid-40s, short, skinny, in dirty work clothes that smelled like motor oil. His teeth were yellow. His fingernails were long and filthy, the kind you get when you work with engines and never bother with a brush. His hair was flat, stuck to his head like he had worn a hat all day. His boots left faint black marks on the tile. He stopped just inside the door and looked around the empty lobby like he was checking for someone. Then he saw me at the counter. He smiled but didn't come closer. The smile didn't reach his eyes. I remember thinking he didn't look drunk, stone sober, just wired tight. I lifted the register screen with a little click and waited for him to step up so I could take the order and get him out of there. He took his time. He stepped closer and then just stood in front of me, still smiling, not saying anything. The lights buzzed over our heads. I could smell the motor oil and sweat under the fryer smell. I glanced at the clock. 2:32. I kept my hands flat on the counter because it felt better to have something solid under them. I said, "Hi, what can I get you?" He kept smiling. It went on long enough that I heard the ice machine dump a load in the bin back by drive-thru. He didn't blink. His eyes were so dark they looked almost black, and I can tell the exact second his smile turned from friendly to something else. My skin tightened across my shoulders. I wasn't scared yet, just alert. I said, a little louder, "What can I get for you tonight?" He finally talked. His voice was scratchy like he'd been yelling all day. "Well, look at this pretty little thing," he said. "I was thinking about fries, but maybe I'll order something else instead." I kept my face even. I've had drunk guys hit on me on these shifts. It's boring more than scary. But this man wasn't slurring. He was focused, staring like he was reading small print on my face. I could see dark lines of grease in the grooves of his knuckles. I said, "Menu's right there. Do you want a combo?" My voice sounded normal to me. I kept it that way on purpose. He leaned over the counter. Not far, just enough to turn my register space into his space. He put his hands down on the laminate with a soft, tacky sound from the oil on his fingers. The nails were thick, yellowed at the tips, black underneath. Even chewed up, they were too long. He watched my eyes to see if I looked at them. I didn't give him that. I stared at the screen like I was busy. Behind me, the heat lamps clicked on with a tiny pop. I could hear Ricardo banging a box open in the back. The door to the kitchen swung a little with the air from the vents. I thought about calling out to him, but I didn't like the idea of turning my back. So I stayed steady and asked again, "What will it be?" He made a hissing sound, like a small laugh pushed through his nose. He glanced past me at the stainless steel, then down at the little name tag on my shirt. He didn't say my name, and I was glad for that. He said, "Maybe I just watch you pick, sweetheart." I shook my head once. "Can't do that." My tone stayed flat, like I was telling a kid no refills. I lifted the paper cup holder and set it straight. I could see the security monitor in my side vision, the empty lobby in black and white squares. I didn't see Ricardo on any of them. The man's smell mixed with hot oil and the sweetness of the buns warming in the drawer. I took one step to the left to line myself up with the register that was closest to the soda machine. If he reached, he'd hit the air, not me. He followed me with his eyes. They didn't move much. He smiled again, wider this time, showing the stains between his teeth. I said, clear and polite, "Please decide on your order." He tapped the counter twice with one dirty nail. He grinned real wide and asked what time I got off work. Normally I would just smile and say I'm married. But something about this guy made me snap. My head hurt, and his grin felt like a hand on my neck. I told him straight, "If you're not ordering food, you need to leave." He looked surprised for a second, then laughed like I'd told a joke, a loud bark that bounced off the tiles. The laugh made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned and knocked hard on the office door with the back of my knuckles. Ricardo opened up, saw my face, and didn't ask questions. He stepped out, wiped his hands on a towel, and told me to take 5. "Go take a break. I'll handle it," he said. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the soda bibs and pushed through the side door to the lot. I sat in my brother's Honda Civic I'd borrowed, cold seat against my legs, and locked the doors. Through the windshield, I could see Ricardo at the counter with the man. Ricardo kept his hands open, calm, pointing toward the exit. The creep didn't look at the food boards. He kept turning his head, scanning the lobby like he lost something. I kept my head down, but watched through the gap under the sun visor. The fryers hissed behind the glass, a steady sound. 10 minutes dragged. Finally, the guy took a bag from Ricardo and turned without a word. He didn't hurry. He walked along the front windows, past the handicap spot, and went to the far end of the parking lot where the streetlight buzzed and bugs spun in the light. I waited 5 more minutes because I didn't want to cross paths with him if he doubled back. I counted to 65 times, breathing slow, hands on the steering wheel like I could drive away if I needed. When I went back in, the warm air hit my face. Ricardo looked shaken, his mouth tight, eyes on the door like he expected it to open again. He told me the man kept asking where the girl went. Wouldn't say my name. He leaned over the counter like before and got angry when Ricardo told him I'd gone home for the night. Ricardo said he didn't want it to turn into a scene, not with the cameras, not with the delivery guys in the back, so he slid the man a free fries and told him to take it and go. He wouldn't move at first, Ricardo said. Then he took the bag and started walking out. But he turned around. Ricardo swallowed and rubbed his palm against his jeans. He said, he paused like it tasted bad. He said, "Tell Lisa that Charlie said goodbye and he'll see her real soon." I felt the air go thin. I hadn't worn a name tag in months after losing the old one. We don't print new ones unless a manager is in. There was no name posted at my station. There was nothing on my jacket. I checked anyway. Nothing. I kept my voice steady. "You sure he said Lisa?" Ricardo nodded once, hard. He looked right at me when he said it. We stood there with the hum of the lights and the drip from the soda nozzles. I walked to the lobby and looked out the window at the far end of the lot. The man was gone. Only the dark guardrail and the highway beyond it, cars whispering by. For the rest of my shift, I kept one eye on the door and the other on the clock. Every time the bell chimed, my hands tightened. A trucker came in for coffee. A trooper used the bathroom and didn't order. A couple in pajamas got hash browns and didn't talk. Nothing strange. Still, I couldn't stop scanning the glass, the reflections on the tile, the black and white squares of the security feed. The lobby camera showed the empty booths. The drive-through camera showed a patch of asphalt and falling snow that melted as soon as it touched the warm concrete under the window. At 5:30, I asked Ricardo to walk me to the bus stop. He didn't argue. We locked the doors for the shift change and stepped out into the first snow of the season. It fell slow, thin flakes that stuck to the tops of the cars. The parking lot looked like a different place under it. Edges went soft. Corners disappeared. The air was quiet, like a blanket sat over the highway noise. We walked fast to the stop by the gas station. My breath came out white. The bench had a dusting of snow on it, so we stood. A red pickup idled by the pumps, heater running, no driver. A stray dog nosed the trash can and trotted off. When the bus pulled up, Ricardo waited while I got on, then lifted a hand and went back toward the store. I sat near the driver and kept my bag on my lap. The windows fogged quick with all the bodies and warm air. We rolled onto the highway. The snow thickened and turned the headlights into cones. Halfway home, the bus made a grinding noise and shuddered. The driver pulled over onto the shoulder and said we'd have to wait for another bus. People groaned. I didn't want to stand on the side of the road in the dark. I stepped down onto the wet gravel, walked away from the group, and called a taxi. My fingers felt stiff on the screen. A car showed up 10 minutes later, an older sedan with a missing hubcap. The driver said his name was Frank. He had gray stubble and a coffee in the cup holder. The heater blasted our faces and smelled like dust. We pulled back into traffic, slow because of the snow. Frank was chatty, but not in a bad way. He asked where I was coming from at this hour. I said Burger King off the 40. He glanced at me in the mirror when I said it, and let out a little breath. "Picked up a weird one from over there earlier," he said. "Guy wanted me to drive all the side streets." Mumbling to himself. I kept my eyes on the wipers working the glass. "What was he saying?" I asked. Frank tapped the wheel. Kept repeating, "meeting up with Lisa," like a reminder. Asked me if I'd seen a Honda Civic around there. A small one. He had me circle a couple of blocks near that motel. Then he told me to pull over at a bus stop, paid in cash, and just stood there in the snow after I left. Didn't make sense. The heater hummed. The city slid by, white at the edges. I looked down at the damp cuff of my pants and saw the salt marks starting. I didn't say anything for a minute. I didn't need to. The shape of it was obvious. He was looking for my car. He had my name somehow. He had waited in the parking lot after taking the food. He had watched the doors. If I had driven myself that night, if I had parked up front like I usually do, he could have waited behind the dumpster or by the bushes near the drive-through exit. He could have followed me all the way home. I pictured the Civic in the lot, snow tracing its edges, and a dark figure 2 rows over, not moving. Frank dropped me outside my building. He waited until I got to the door before pulling away. The snow had turned the steps slick, and my key felt heavy in the lock. Inside, the lights were off, and the apartment smelled like Vicks from the baby's room. I set my bag down and dialed the non-emergency number. My voice sounded calm when I told the dispatcher what happened. She sent a patrol car. 2 officers came up the stairs. I gave them the timeline and the quotes, every detail I could remember, how he looked, the nails, the smell of oil, the exact words he said to Ricardo. They wrote it down. They were polite and tired. The police took my statement, but said they couldn't do much without actual threats or violence. This was December 2019 when I was a sophomore at the University of Oregon. My psychology professor, Dr. Harris, asked me to house sit while he went to a conference in Seattle. His place was about 20 miles from campus, a big property with gardens, a pond, and an old barn. The house was from the 70s, low and square, with long windows. It sat in a pocket of pines and maples that blocked the road and most of the noise. I invited my girlfriend Sarah so we could get out of the dorms. We drove out on Thursday afternoon on a gravel road that rattled my Civic. The gate clicked behind us, and the place felt still. Inside, we let Felix, his cat, sniff our shoes and lead us around like a tour guide. I fed him from a little plastic tub on the counter, and he rubbed my leg like he approved. The house smelled like heater dust at first. The kitchen had heavy old pans and avocado cabinets. The living room had a sagging leather couch and a brick fireplace. We cooked pasta, ate on the coffee table, and streamed a movie on my laptop because the stack of VHS tapes was useless. Wind moved the pines outside, slow and steady. Felix made biscuits on a blanket and went to sleep with his paws tucked under. Nothing weird happened, but small things made me look twice. The deadbolt on the back slider stuck like it hadn't been used in a while. The mudroom smelled faintly like cigarettes, even though Dr. Harris didn't smoke. A split log on top of the wood pile looked newly cut with sap still wet. It was nothing I could prove meant anything. I figured a gardener came by sometimes and left things how he liked. Friday morning we walked the property. The gardens were bare and frosted over. The pond had ice like thin glass around the edges. The barn sat back by the tree line with peeling red paint and clouded windows. Its padlock was rusty but solid when I tugged the door. Sarah said it looked like a movie. Felix followed us halfway and then sat down and stared, tail tucked around his feet like a ring. The quiet out there had its own weight. You could hear a woodpecker far off and the creak of branches. By the fence, we found a crushed energy drink can half buried in leaves. It could have blown in. The county road wasn't that far. I kicked it toward the driveway to throw away later. We cut back along the pond. Air moving over the ice made a faint hiss and then stopped. Friday night we made tacos, and the house popped as it warmed. Felix sat at the back slider, watching the yard for a long time. His ears twitched at sounds we couldn't hear. I took a bag of trash to the bin by the garage and pulled a bungee over the lid so raccoons wouldn't get in. A branch snapped somewhere left of the barn, not close, and then it was quiet again. I told myself it was deer. We locked up at 10. I walked the house, checking windows and doors. The motion light over the back porch buzzed and flickered like the bulb was dying. My phone barely had 1 bar of service. The guest room had 1 wall of glass that faced the trees. We lay there under a heavy quilt and listened to the heater hum. I woke once to a single drip in the sink and went back to sleep. Saturday stayed gray and colder. We made pancakes and coffee and let Felix chase a string around the kitchen. Around noon, I shoveled cold ashes from the fireplace into a metal bucket and set it by the porch to cool. The woods looked flat and dark, even with no snow. I checked email in case Dr. Harris had notes about the house or the cat. Nothing from him. The day slid by without much happening. Afternoon light died fast. The motion light refused to turn on when I opened the slider to toss apple cores into the compost by the shed. I tried the switch a few times and got a sick buzz and nothing else. It wasn't a crisis. There was another porch light by the kitchen door, and we had 2 flashlights in a drawer with the batteries. I closed the slider, set the lock, and went back to the couch. Toward evening, Felix changed. One minute he was loafed on the rug. The next, he jumped up like a shot and started pacing. He meowed short and loud at first, then long, broken sounds that filled the room. He planted his paws on the slider and scratched at the wood next to the glass. The noise was dull and harsh. He kept going even when I said his name. He didn't look at us at all. He started that drawn-out wail that makes your spine tighten. He stood up on his back legs and dragged his claws down, then did it again. I figured a coyote or a stray dog was prowling, maybe sniffing the trash or the compost. I wasn't letting him out. I picked him up. He twisted free and went right back to the door, pressed flat to the floor like he was ready to sprint the second it opened. Sarah said we should look with a flashlight. I said we should wait it out. There are bears in those woods. Dr. Harris had mentioned them, but I knew what a bad idea it was to wander around in the dark because a cat had opinions. But the sound Felix was making kept scraping at me. The house felt smaller with it. Curiosity won while the noise clawed at the door. We put on shoes. I grabbed the bigger flashlight from the drawer. I slid the door open a few inches and listened. Cold air rushed in and smelled like wet leaves and old smoke. I didn't hear anything except the porch light buzzing. I opened the slider wide enough for us to step out, and then I pulled it shut again. Felix slammed the glass with both paws and crouched low, tail puffed like a bottle brush. The porch boards were damp and cold. Our breath showed in front of us. We stayed under the eave. The yard was black with lighter patches of frost. The gardens were dark shapes, the pond a flat ellipse with no reflection. The barn was a dull block near the trees. Somewhere a drop fell, then nothing. Sarah held the flashlight high but didn't turn it on yet. I lifted my hand off the handle and felt dumb. I told her to sweep low first. She clicked the light on. The beam cut across the steps, the compost bin, the little run of pavers, and the edge of lawn where it turned to brush. The beam made the frost glow. It was quiet in a way that felt heavy and old. I waited for a sound and heard only the light buzz in our breathing. Felix stayed fixed to the glass like a drawn bow. We stepped onto the back porch. Sarah aimed the flashlight toward the edge and caught sight of something gray that quickly disappeared behind the trees. We shut the slider and locked it. The cold came off our clothes like fog as we stepped back into the living room. Felix went quiet almost right away. He circled once on the couch, kneaded the blanket, and curled tight with his nose tucked under his tail. I told Sarah it had to be a coyote or a raccoon cutting through the trees. We left the flashlight on the coffee table and put the chain on the front door just because. The TV played one of those old house-flipping shows with the volume down. We tried to go back to normal. Sarah scrolled on her phone, then set it down and rubbed at her eyes. I checked the thermostat and turned it up 2 degrees. The heater kicked on with a low thud. It felt like we had done the responsible thing by staying inside. The porch light still buzzed like a bug trapped in a jar. Around midnight, we brushed our teeth in the guest bath. The mirror had a faint scratch across the corner that caught the light. When we came back down the hall, Felix wasn't on the couch. He was up on the front window ledge, staring into the dark. His back was arched and his tail was puffed. He hissed, short and sharp, then again. He tapped the glass with one paw, claws just touching. I went to the window and pressed my face to the glass. The front yard ran into pines and the gravel drive. The motion light had a cone of dead space it didn't reach. The road was a faint gray ribbon, no headlights, no traffic. The trees looked like a wall. I didn't see anything move. We stood there a while, letting our eyes adjust, but the dark held steady. Felix growled in this low, weird way I'd never heard. We started doing the math the same way as before. Maybe the same animal looped around from the back to the front, smelled the trash, got brave. Maybe it had a den nearby. I told Sarah I'd secure the trash better in the morning. She said we should shut the bedroom door so we didn't listen to cat drama all night. That sounded fine. We turned off the living room lights and left a lamp in the hall. In the bedroom, we closed the door and set my backpack in front of it. Not because it would stop anything, but because it made some sense. We got into bed with our clothes still on top of the quilt. The heater hummed, then cut, then came back. I scrolled past 2 emails I didn't care about. My phone showed 12:22 a.m. The house sounded like an old boat, small flexes and quiet clicks. I fell asleep in pieces. Sometime after 1, I woke because I thought I heard talking. Not talking. Singing. A woman's voice, low and soft, like the tune was something she was humming to herself while she worked. It came from the back of the house, the direction of the fruit trees. I sat up and listened without moving. It wasn't the TV. We had turned everything off. There were no neighbors out here. The nearest house was over a mile away, past the turn-off. The voice was there, then it wasn't. Then it slid back in, following a slow pattern of a melody I didn't know. I shook Sarah's shoulder once. She didn't say anything at first, then her eyes opened and she listened. We both focused on the space above the headboard like that would help. The tune climbed and then steadied. It wasn't loud. It sounded like it was 10 yards past the porch, near the trees. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a person standing in the cold, singing to themselves. For no reason that made sense. Sarah was already moving. She swung her legs out of bed and grabbed her shoes. "We're leaving," she said low. I didn't argue. I got up and stuffed my charger, wallet, keys, and the flashlight in my backpack. We didn't bother with the bedroom lamp. We opened the door to the hall and the singing came a touch clearer for a second, like a breath carried it. Then it faded again. Felix wasn't in sight. I said his name once. He didn't come. We moved fast. I took the cat food container and set it by his bowl and opened a second water dish from under the sink. I didn't want him locked in a room or trapped. Sarah was putting our clothes into the tote we'd used for groceries. The living room looked wrong with all the lights still on. The porch light was still buzzing. I locked the front door behind us, then unlocked it because I'd set the chain. My hands felt slow even though I was going quick. The singing didn't stop. It just drifted. It never came closer. It never moved to the front. It stayed somewhere back where the fruit trees were, like someone standing between rows and leaning on a post, not in a hurry. We put our bags in the Civic, got in, and I turned the key. The dash clock showed 1:11 a.m. The gravel sounded too loud as we rolled down the drive. I checked the mirrors and kept my eyes on the trees where the drive curved. Nothing stepped out. Nothing followed. Out on the county road, the car felt small. I called Mike on speaker. He picked up on the third ring with that rough voice he got when he'd been sleeping. I told him to talk to me so I'd stay sharp. He asked what happened, and I gave him the short version. "Keep going," he said. "Don't turn around." We passed the mile marker, and the dark opened a little because the road was wider. Sarah watched the side mirror until the property was gone. We got back to campus after 2. I dropped Sarah near her dorm, then parked and sat in the car a minute, listening to the engine click as it cooled. The heater smell had a hot plastic edge. My phone still had almost no service out at the house, Campus felt noisy by comparison. I slept in my clothes and woke up in the same spot to sunlight in the blinds. We drove back late morning to feed Felix and pick up what we left. I kept waiting to see tire tracks in the soft shoulder or a weird car at the turnoff. The gate was the way we left it. The porch light was still on in daytime. The lock turned smooth. Inside, the air felt normal. No damage, no mess. Felix walked out of the kitchen like nothing had happened and rubbed against my shin until I put food in his bowl. We checked the back first. The fruit trees stood with frost on the bark like a film. The grass was stiff. I looked for footprints or cigarette butts or anything that could make sense of last night. There was nothing but our own tracks from before. The compost bin lid was on. The barn sat the same with its peeling red paint and that padlock that didn't look touched. The pond edge had thawed a little, leaving a wet ring of mud with no prints but birds. It was possible the sound carried from farther off. People got lost on trails. Teens camped where they shouldn't. Dr. Harris had said the woods drew students on weekends. Maybe someone had a portable speaker and wandered near the property line for a while. Maybe the wind pushed music so it sounded close, then far. I couldn't make it line up with the quiet we were standing in, but I didn't have anything else. We walked the front too. The gravel held tire marks from our car and some older ones, faded. No new trash, no broken branches, no sign of a person stepping off into the trees. The motion light still refused to fire. I made a note to tell Dr. Harris about it so he could swap the bulb. Inside, I collected my charger and a shirt I'd left on a chair. I topped up the water dishes and checked that the cat door to the garage was open in case Felix wanted to hide. He blinked slow from the couch and then went back to grooming a paw. Sarah gathered her sweater and the tote with our food. We left the kitchen light on so the house didn't look dead at night. I texted Dr. Harris a simple update that Felix was fed and fine, and that we'd be back Sunday evening to close up, but I already knew we weren't staying another night. The house was solid. The doors worked. Nothing was wrong that I could point to, except for a voice in the trees at 1 a.m. That was enough. I said it out loud in the car. No more remote house sitting. Then I drove us back to campus. I was 22, a junior at CU Boulder, and I delivered newspapers in the mountain areas outside town. The winter shifts started at 1 a.m. and could run late into the day if the roads iced up. That January, I drew a new subscription on Pine Trail. Locals cursed that road. It wound along a north-facing slope under tall pines. GPS barely held a signal up there. I rode my Yamaha as far as I trusted it, feathering the rear brake around glassy corners. The sky was black and hard. Snow from the last storm sat in crusted ridges along the shoulder. My headlight hit frozen ruts and old chains left glitter in the ice. I passed 2 mailboxes half buried under drift walls and a turnout that looked plowed. I eased into it, killed the engine, and the quiet hit. Just whined through timber and the faint tick of cooling metal. I zipped my jacket, slung the canvas bag, and switched on my headlamp. Footing was slow on the slope back to the road. Tracks from deer crossed the ditch. The paper for 847 Pine Trail sat in a plastic sleeve in my bag. The address note said the mailbox was 100 yards from the house at the bottom of a long drive. Houses up there were spread far apart, screened by trees. Most kept their lights off to sleep through the night wind. My phone showed 1 bar and a frozen map tile. I knew enough not to trust it. Pine Trail was a single lane in places, and it felt like walking a spine. My boots squeaked on the cold snow. The air smelled like sap and exhaust from my bike. The trees crowded close, branches heavy with old powder. I checked the numbers stenciled on the posts as I passed. 851, 849. Then a black mailbox with reflective tape on the arm, 847 in faded stick-on digits. The mailbox sat by a wooden post. The driveway dropped down from it at a steep angle and curved out of sight under pines. The snow on it was packed by tires but glazed in places. I kept my feet planted on the road shoulder and opened the mailbox with a gloved hand. The hinge squealed and stuck for a second. Cold bit through the glove while I slid the paper inside. That was when I heard them. 2 dogs, big ones, barking somewhere low and to my left. It came bouncing through the trees, deep and angry, the kind of sound you feel in your ribs. I froze and scanned the slope. The headlamp beam picked up trunks, a tangle of brush, nothing moving. Then metal clinked, like a chain hitting a stake. The bark rolled again, closer this time. I shut the mailbox, latched it down, and took one step back from the driveway. I kept my shoulders square to the sound and moved slow. The road had just enough room to walk the outside edge without dropping into the ditch. I adjusted the bag strap and looked up the line of the driveway out of habit. I didn't plan to go down there. It was steep, slick, and I had other stops. But I glanced, because that's what you do. You check for movement. You check for a porch light. You check for a person who wants to know why some guy is by their box at 3-something in the morning. It was closer to 4 by the time the light came on. It hit me like a camera flash up the hill. A single bulb over the front door burned warm through the cold air. The house was a square shadow with a peaked roof and dark windows. A railing ran along the porch, snow slumped on top. The door opened, and an elderly woman stepped out in a heavy bathrobe and boots. Her hair was short and gray, and her bare legs looked red and raw in the light. I raised my left hand above the headlamp beam and waved. Newspaper delivery from Mountain News. The dog started up again below me, and I angled the lamp away so I wasn't blasting her eyes. She did not wave back. She leaned over the railing and yelled, voice high and rough. "Who are you? What do you want?" I held my badge up on its lanyard and took one half step toward the mailbox so I could be seen better and not slide off the edge. "It's just the paper," I said. "Your subscription for 847. I put it in the box. I'm leaving now." Her mouth kept moving. I could hear the shape of "no" and "get out," and something about my headlamp. The porch light threw hard shadows down the driveway. I didn't feel like I could turn my back with the dogs sounding off in the trees. So I stood where I was, badge up in my hand, and tried to look like a person doing his job. She kept yelling. It was fear and anger mixed together, and it came in short bursts. I thought about pulling out my phone and calling the number on the route sheet, but there was no signal. The wind ran through the pines. The dogs went quiet all at once like someone had pressed a button. That sudden silence was worse. "Ma'am," I tried again, not moving. The headlamp spilled across the driveway and a little onto her porch. She moved her left hand up to block it, and with that motion, I saw something else. Her right arm hung low at her side, and there was a metallic shape there that caught the light. She stepped farther into the glow of the porch lamp. The robe swung, and the metal came up with her hand. It was a large pair of garden shears, the long kind with black grips and steel blades, and she was pointing them directly at me like a weapon. She came down off her porch fast, robe flapping, boots grinding the ice on the steps. The shears were up at her shoulder like she trained with them. The long blades caught my headlamp beam and flashed dull steel. 2 German shepherds pulled at her, big bodies, thick winter coats, teeth showing in strings of white breath. Their collars had heavy rings and wide leather. The leashes were black webbing wrapped around her wrist. She was yelling over the wind, words jammed together, about trespassers and thieves and people taking things. The noise bounced off the trees and felt closer than it was. I raised my empty hands and kept my feet planted. "I'll just leave the paper here and go." No problem at all. My voice sounded small on the slope. The dogs lowered their heads and leaned into their harnesses. Their paws punched clean holes in the crust, and snow sprayed back. Tags clinked against buckles. The woman didn't slow. She waved the shears once, wide, like a warning. I tried to make space without turning my back. I took a step higher on the road crown and let the strap slide off my shoulder so the bag hung at my side. The dog's growl rolled together. The cords in her arms stood out against the robe as she raised the shears and pointed at my chest like it was a knife. I felt the urge to explain again, but it didn't matter. She wasn't listening. She was afraid and angry. Maybe she thought someone had been prowling out here. Maybe someone had. I shifted my weight to leave. The drive above me curved out of sight, and if I moved quick, I could be at the bike before they got a straight run. I turned just enough to show my shoulder. That was when she screamed it. "Sick him!" The word hit sharp. She whipped her wrist, and both leashes snapped free of her hand. The webbing fell like dark snakes on the snow. I didn't watch the clip bounce. I didn't look at her face. I ran. Boots hammering the packed track, bag slapping my hip, breath ripping the cold. The slope tilted against my legs, and I drove my feet straight through the crust for grip. Behind me, the dogs exploded into motion, nails skittering the first steps, then traction, then speed. Their bark turned from warning to pursuit. The sound stuck to my back and pushed me up the hill. The road to my motorcycle felt longer than it had on the way down. The trees on both sides made a tunnel of black. My lungs burned deep and raw. Air iced the back of my throat. I pumped my arms and stayed off the glare ice patches where wind had polished the tire tracks. The headlamp on my forehead bounced and threw the shadows wild. I didn't look back because that wastes time. I listened. The dogs were closing. The rhythm of their paws was different than my steps, 4 beats to my 2, and getting tighter. My Yamaha sat nose out in the turnout like a lifeline. Frost had filmed over the seat. I got there and slapped the kill switch back to run, booted the stand-up with my heel, and thumbed the starter. The engine rolled once, twice, then caught and barked loud in the cold air. The headlight blasted a white cone up Pine Trail. In the top edge of the beam, I saw 2 dark heads crest the ridge below, ears forward, eyes glassy with light. Their bodies were low and ready. I feathered the clutch and dumped the throttle. The rear tire spit grit and powdered snow. The bike lurched and straightened. I took the lane middle and let the engine scream. Wind slapped my face through the balaclava. I didn't look in the mirrors. I ran the road by memory from 5 minutes earlier, counted the curves, and kept my inside shoulder high so I wouldn't slide. The hill fell away and then rose, and I let the torque pull me out. I cleaned the rest of the route because that was my job. Hands shook when I folded and tossed. Coffee from a gas station sat in my stomach like a rock. By 9, I rolled into the office on Arapahoe and parked under the leaning light pole. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and wet cardboard. Fluorescence hummed. My manager, Tom Anderson, was at the desk with the route board. He was in his 50s, thick jacket, clipboard stamped with the company logo. I told him what happened, fast and straight. Dogs, the woman, the shears, the yelling, the chase. He stopped writing and looked up slow. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. He scratched the address on the sheet and circled it. "I'll contact the customer and figure out what happened," he said. "Maybe mix up with the start date. Maybe a house sitter. I'll drive up there tomorrow and smooth it over. You shouldn't deal with that again." I said I'd finish the next night's route, but I didn't want Pine Trail until this got sorted. He agreed. He pulled the slot magnet off the board and stuck it on a different line so someone else would cover the mountain run. I went home, showered hot until the numb feeling left my legs, and slept a few hours with my phone on loud on the nightstand. The next evening I came in early. Snow squeaked under my boots on the warehouse floor. The stacks of bundled papers were strapped tight with plastic. Tom's truck keys were on his desk, not in his jacket, which meant he was still out. I ran my first stops and came back at dusk to restock, and Tom was in the office with his jacket half off and a look on his face I hadn't seen before. He waved me in. "I went to 847 Pine Trail," he said. "It's abandoned." He didn't dress it up. Windows boarded, plywood across the door. No tire tracks, no footprints except mine. Weeds up through the steps, dead and frozen. No lights, no dogs, nobody. He took a breath and put a photo on the desk, taken from the road. The house was dark and sagging under snow. A sheet of OSB covered the door. The mailbox was the same black one I'd used. He called the property management number stenciled on a small sign nailed to a pine. They said the place had been empty for years. Nobody up there. No utilities. It wasn't a weekend rental. It wasn't anything. Tom sat with that for a minute and then called our contracting company about the subscription. They put him on hold, came back with a soft answer, then admitted the thing they didn't want to admit. They were padding their customer list. They pulled addresses from tax rolls and old directories. Vacant lots, foreclosures, houses between owners. They built fake starts to make the numbers look good for advertisers. Some of those got assigned to us. 847 was one of them. Tom showed me the spreadsheet they emailed after he pushed. Names that were probably not real. Start dates that matched no payments. I recognized 2 other addresses on my mountain route. So if the house was empty, who was the woman I saw with the garden shears and those dogs? I didn't say it out loud. I looked at the photo again and traced the angle where the porch light should be. Just a dark bracket now under the eave. The dog's prints I remembered didn't exist in Tom's picture. It was quiet in the office except for the heater kicking on and the paper press in the back cycling up. I finished that week's deliveries on the flatter routes. I told Tom I was done after Sunday. I turned in my route keys and my badge on Monday morning. He didn't argue much. He said he'd file a report about the fake subscriptions and cut Pine Trail until we had something solid. I never got an answer. It still bothers me when I think about the way those dogs moved and the way the metal shears looked in the porch light. I avoid that road now when I ride. When I see a number stenciled on a mailbox in the mountains, I look once and keep going. Last summer, I moved to Tucson to study engineering at the University of Arizona. I rented a 1-bedroom at Sunrise Hills on the 2nd floor. The place sat a few blocks from campus. The rent was $850 a month, which I could handle with savings and a part-time lab job. The buildings were stucco with red tile roofs. It felt safe. From my balcony, I could see the parking lot and the main entrance. My neighbor Carlos was in computer science. We met the first week. He lived a few doors down in the same building and kept his door open for airflow. We hung out a lot, playing PlayStation and cooking. He showed me how to make carne asada in a cast iron pan and how to warm tortillas on the burner without burning them. We ate on paper plates, watched soccer, and talked about finals. He helped me mount a shelf, and I helped him carry a desk up the stairs. For 6 months, everything was simple. I biked to class, did laundry on Sundays, and studied at night. The neighbors were quiet. A couple with a toddler lived downstairs. A retired guy walked a tiny dog every morning. Maintenance picked up work orders fast. The only noise came from Speedway Avenue, a soft rush that faded into the background after a week. I paid rent online on the 1st and never thought twice about locks or doors. I got used to my routine and the light in my kitchen at sunset. January changed the rhythm. The first weird thing was small. I came home after lab and found my doormat turned sideways. Maybe the wind or a delivery guy, I thought, and I straightened it. 2 days later, my mailbox was open with nothing inside. I knew I had a utility bill coming. The next morning, the bill was stuck under my door like someone had found it. No note. Just the folded envelope. A wet corner from the sprinklers. The second week, I noticed faint scratches around the keyhole on my front door. Thin crescent lines in the paint like someone missed with a key. I checked my keys and tried to match them. The marks didn't match me. I told myself the previous tenant probably did it. I still bought a cheap door bar at Walmart and wedged it at night. I also started double-checking the sliding door lock on the balcony, pressing it twice with my thumb until it clicked. Other small things stacked up. Cigarette butts showed on the landing outside my unit, even though I was the only one who smoked there. They were a different brand than mine. Twice in 1 week, someone buzzed the gate and hung up when I answered. Not a big deal, but it pulled at me. I mentioned it to Carlos and he said to keep my door locked. He offered me an extra chain from his old apartment. I installed it the same night. The parking lot started to feel different at night. One evening after groceries, I walked up the stairs and felt eyes on me from somewhere near the entrance. No one was there when I looked, just the busted light over the mailboxes and a soda can rolling in the wind. I carried on, told myself to stop being dramatic, and turned on every light inside as soon as I was in. I kept my shoes by the door and my backpack on a chair so I could leave fast if I needed to. That was new for me. On Tuesday, January 15th, I spent the evening at Carlos's place. We played FIFA and drank his homemade beer from mason jars. It was strong and tasted a little sour, but it hit fast. We laughed too loud for the hour. Around 2 in the morning, I said I had an early lab and needed sleep. Carlos walked me to the hallway, fist bumped me, and told me to text when I got in. The building was quiet. The carpet in the corridor muffled our steps. I could hear the hum of the vending machine by the stairs. I went into my apartment and tossed my keys on the counter. The room smelled like my cooking from earlier, onions and oil. I cracked the sliding door and stepped onto the balcony for a cigarette. The metal rail was cold through my t-shirt. The balcony overlooked the parking lot and the main entrance to the complex. From up there, I could see the speed limit sign on Speedway Avenue and the dark shape of the bus stop shelter. The sky was clear, stars faded by city light. A coyote barked somewhere far off. It was otherwise silent. It was completely deserted outside. No one walked between the buildings. The pool gate was chained. The street lamps threw weak circles on the asphalt. Every few minutes a car cut down Speedway, headlights sliding across the stucco, then gone. I smoked slow and tried to listen past the ringing in my ears from the games and the beer. I looked over my shoulder once at the sliding door to make sure I hadn't locked myself out. I kept my phone in my pocket out of habit and checked it. No messages. When I finished my smoke, I flicked the ash into the little tin I kept out there and went back inside. I locked the sliding door, pushed on it twice, and let the blinds fall back into place. I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a second, letting my eyes adjust. The stove clock read 2:11. I set a glass of water by the bed, plugged in my phone, and kicked off my shoes. I brushed my teeth and laid out the clothes I needed for morning on the chair. Suddenly the doorbell rang once, sharp. I froze. Who would come now without texting or calling? My first thought was Carlos. Maybe he forgot his keys or a charger. But he always texted first. I waited and listened. The apartment was quiet except the old fridge. After about 30 seconds, the bell rang again, shorter, then a soft knock, like knuckles brushing wood. Whoever stood there knew I was home. The TV remote sat by my hand. My phone was on the nightstand. I moved slow to the door and put my ear to it. I heard a shoe scrape on the hallway carpet and a breath through the gap. I set the door bar tight with my foot and slid the chain to make sure. Then I leaned into the peephole. A man in a dark hoodie filled the circle. Hood up, face mostly shadow. He wasn't trying to hide from the peephole. He stared straight into it, like into my eye. I felt heat in my neck. He didn't blink. His hands were in the front pocket. He stood too close, like he knew the range of the lens. I didn't move. He tilted his head a little like he was checking if I was still there. Behind him, the hallway light flickered. Far down the corridor, I could see the red glow of the exit sign. No other doors opened. The building slept. The stranger took one small step back from the door and spoke. "I know you're standing there, buddy." His voice was calm and flat. No slur, no hurry. The words hit through the wood. I found my voice and kept it low. I told him I was calling the police. I didn't yell. He laughed once, like a short cough. "Go for it, hero." He pulled something from his pocket. It looked like a folded cloth or a glove, dark. He wiped the door handle slow, up and down, then the faceplate around the lock, each pass careful. Then he turned and walked away without looking at the peephole again. I stood still and counted 10. I listened for steps. I heard the soft thump of the stair door 2 flights over, then nothing. My hands shook a bit, so I pressed my palm to the door to steady. I went to the nightstand, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. I kept my voice level, gave my address, my unit, described the hoodie, the time. The dispatcher asked if I was safe and told me not to open the door. She said an officer was on the way and stayed on the line. I stood by the peephole and watched the empty hall. 3 minutes felt heavy. Then I saw blue and red splash across the far wall from the lot. A knock came, 3 quick. Police. I checked the peephole again and saw a uniform and a badge. I opened the chain and the deadbolt but kept the bar down. Officer Rodriguez showed his ID through the gap and stood back with hands visible. I lifted the bar and let him in. He was mid-30s, short hair, vest under his shirt. He asked if anyone else was inside. I said no and pointed at the handle. He looked close with a small flashlight and nodded. He asked for a description. I gave what I had. Male, average build, dark hoodie, no face seen, calm voice. We stepped into the hallway. He scanned both directions. No one. He checked the stairwell door. It closed slow and hissed. He ran a finger along the handle of my door again and frowned. He told me he'd taken similar calls in the area for about a month. Usually late night. Mostly student apartments. Sometimes the person just tested doors. Sometimes they rang and walked. Sometimes they wiped like this. He said, "It looks like he's checking units for later. Could be burglaries. Could be worse." He asked if I had anyone to stay with tonight. Rodriguez took a report. He asked about cameras. Our building had none in the interior. Only a busted one over the mailboxes. He said they'd patrol the lot more for a while. He told me to keep the door secured and not engage if the person came back. He gave me a card with a case number. He asked me to call if I remembered more. Before he left, he stepped onto the balcony and scanned the lot with his light. The beam swept over the cars, the gate, the trash corral. Nothing moved. Then he left, walking the hallway slow, listening, hand near his radio. I locked everything again. I put a chair under the knob, even with the bar in place. I put my shoes next to the bed. I lay down with the phone charging on my chest. Sleep didn't come. I listened to pipes and the distant road and my neighbor's fridge cycling. Around 4, I must have dozed. When sun pushed the blinds, I got up, made coffee, and messaged Carlos. He read it fast and told me to come over with my stuff. I packed a backpack and my laptop and walked the hall, checking corners. In the daylight, it looked normal again. I spent the next week sleeping on Carlos's futon. We kept the couch pulled from the wall so we could see the door. I went back to my unit during the day to shower and install more security. I added a longer strike plate, heavy screws, a second deadbolt, and the chain Carlos gave me. I bought a small alarm kit with a keypad and door sensors. I labeled every sensor with masking tape. The thing chirped loud when armed. I put a wedge alarm under the sliding door too. I moved a metal rod into the track and tested it twice. The complex manager, Mr. Johnson, sent an email to all residents the same week. He said they were increasing security and adding cameras in all the hallways and entries. He hired a third-party installer in 2 days. I saw the crew running cable and mounting domes by each stairwell. New bright bulbs went in over the mailboxes and the vending machine. Signs went up, recording in progress. He also changed the gate timer so it stayed locked at night and buzzed for shorter periods. The mail carrier started closing the mailbox bank lid harder. Small things, but they felt like steps. I filed a copy of the police report with the office. Mr. Johnson met me in the lobby and asked if I wanted to move to a unit by the stairs. I decided to stay and finish the semester. He gave me a discount on February as a gesture. Carlos and I adjusted our routine. We walked to our doors together at night. If I came back late, I called him from the lot and we moved together. If he had a late lab, I met him in the lobby. We kept doors locked even when we were home and only opened after checking. It has been 9 months now. No arrest as far as I know. I check the neighborhood app sometimes, and I haven't seen new posts about a guy in a hoodie, at least not on our block. Maybe he moved to a different part of town. Maybe he stopped. Maybe the cameras pushed him out. I still watch the peephole when the elevator dings. I still keep the alarm armed even for a quick nap. Now I always check who is at the door before I open anything. I keep my phone charged and a small flashlight by the bed. I keep a spare battery in my backpack. I tap each lock with my knuckle when I leave. The habit stuck. It's boring, but it works. If someone rings late, I let it ring. If someone wants inside, they can talk through wood and a chain. I don't care if it feels rude. This whole thing taught me not to trust strangers and to prepare, especially in student housing. I don't make speeches about it. I just lock up and move smart. Sometimes I still wonder what that guy's real intentions were. I'm Ryan O'Connor, 19, a sophomore, and this happened in January 2023. Winter break was almost over, and I had spent New Year's up in Sterling with my buddy Jake. We watched cheap fireworks in his driveway and played cards until late. I needed to get back to Denver for the start of spring semester, so I decided to beat the morning traffic and drive before dawn. I left his place around 3 in the morning in my old Jeep Cherokee, a V6 with a lot of miles and a heater that only worked after 10 minutes. The plan was simple. 2 hours on I-76, mostly empty farmland, windbreaks, pivot sprinklers frozen in the fields. You might see 1 or 2 cars the whole trip at that hour. The highway shoulders were hard-packed with old plow berms. The sky was clear, but the air felt brittle, the type of cold that makes plastic crack. I set the cruise at 65 because some stretches had black ice warnings, and I didn't trust the tires. The radio kept dropping out, and the only light was the pale strip from my high beams. Around 5 a.m., I was on that empty stretch between Sterling and Fort Morgan, where the land is flat and the cottonwoods run along the drainage. No other headlights in either direction. The temperature read numbers I tried not to think about. That's when my high beams caught a dark shape sitting in my lane. It was low and bulky, right where a car tire would meet it. At first glance I thought deer, because you see them there all winter, sometimes in groups at the fence line. I eased off the cruise and covered the brake. As I got closer, the outline changed. It wasn't tall like a whitetail. It was wider, with the head down. The fur looked black, with that dull shine in the beams. That's when my brain said bear. In Colorado, they don't fully hibernate. They move when it warms a little, and we'd had a Chinook earlier that week. I was doing about 50 now. I didn't have room to stop on the ice in time. I jerked the wheel left to miss it and felt the weight of the Cherokee swing. The right tires hit the rumble strip and then the shoulder. The back end drifted, and I tried to correct, but I was already sliding off the pavement. The Jeep went into the snowpack, and then there was a hard bump as we left the road. I saw trunks coming fast in the lights, and then everything turned white with exploding powder. The front end slammed into a line of cottonwoods at the edge of the right-of-way. The airbags blew. The horn stuck for a second, and then died. The seatbelt locked my chest so hard it felt like a punch. I sat there hearing the ticking of metal and a hiss. The cab smelled like antifreeze and burned powder. Steam rolled out from under the crumpled hood, and the front bumper was hanging off at a bad angle, almost touching the ground. The driver's headlight was gone. The radiator fluid was puddling under the nose and streaking down into the frozen ditch. The windshield had a spiderweb crack where the bag had smacked it, but it held. The bear I'd swerved for was gone, somewhere back in the trees. I checked my phone. No service. Not even one bar. I remembered Jake had tossed his satellite phone into my glove box when we were loading my stuff, in case I broke down between towns. I pulled it out, turned it on, and waited for it to grab a signal. The screen found a satellite, and I called emergency. A calm voice asked for my mile marker and direction of travel. I gave landmarks, the drainage, the last exit sign I remembered. The dispatcher told me help would arrive in about 40 minutes. I killed the engine and switched on the hazards to save the battery. The amber blinkers reflected off the broken chrome like a weak lighthouse. I put on gloves, zipped my jacket, and got out. The door creaked and scraped the bent fender. The air outside stabbed my teeth. It was around 20 below. My breath came out in a dense cloud that turned into fine crystals and drifted down. The highway looked like a black ribbon across the white fields. No cars, no trucks. Just the sound of wind pushing through dry grass and the steady blink of the hazards. I stood on the shoulder facing oncoming traffic, a few feet from the Jeep, so anyone cresting the rise would see the hazards and me waving them down. I kept the satellite phone in my pocket and the gloves jammed tight. My legs started to feel numb through my jeans fast. I stomped my boots to keep blood moving. Every couple of minutes I glanced back at the engine bay to make sure nothing was catching fire. The hood was bent up in the middle and gapped toward the windshield like a broken jaw. 10 minutes passed. I checked the time on the sat phone. The screen lagged, cold slow. No headlights broke the horizon. I turned my body sideways to block the wind and held my collar up. The road felt hollow, like the whole state had gone to sleep. I tried the regular phone again. Still dead. I thought about moving into the passenger side to warm up, but I didn't want to be inside if a semi came around the bend and drifted over. Time stretched thin. The fields looked endless, and the sky stayed the same hard blue-black. I kept watching the rise and flexing my hands in the gloves, trying to bring feeling back into my fingers. The hazards blinked on and off, painting the snow orange there. I heard branches snapping and crashing in the woods behind me. A massive black bear stepped out of the trees, head low. I knew I hadn't missed the animal in the road. I had hit a cub, and this was its mother. She was huge, close to 300 pounds. She tested the air, saw me by the hazards, and came on with a steady gait that ate ground fast. I ran to the back of the Cherokee. The bent hatch lifted. I scrambled into the cargo area and slammed it down. Her paws hit the bumper as the latch caught. The whole Jeep jumped on the crushed front. I slid my boots to the hatch and braced, shoulders into the folded seat, one hand on the inside release in case the latch shifted. I flattened in the cargo space and shut off the dome light. Cold came up through the carpet. Outside, she snorted, then claws ticked on metal. Antifreeze steamed from the grill and mixed with the smell of wet fur leaking through torn seals. I kept my breathing short and listened to how she moved. She tested the rear glass with a claw, a dry, skittering sound. Then she slammed her weight into the hatch. The latch held, but the floor jumped and the windows buzzed. I wedged my back into the wheel well and pressed my boots into the metal. I didn't shout or bang. Drawing her attention felt wrong. I watched the latch and tried to stay small. For 30 minutes she worked the car. She clawed at seams, bit tires, and threw her weight into doors and panels. Each hit came up through the floor. The front end creaked against the cottonwoods. Something under the hood hissed and popped. Metal screeched. Glass crackled. Her roar was thick and low, more pressure than sound. The rear window spiderwebbed. Fine lines spread from the corner she worked. Her head filled the glass, muzzle wet, eyes dark, teeth bared, breath smeared the surface. She raked a corner until it collapsed. Cold air pushed in with the stink of fur and mud. The plastic trim flexed and snapped. She moved down the passenger side and tried the handles, then shook the shell. The mirror snapped off and slid. I felt the right rear tire go soft. The front right had blown in the crash, so the Jeep settled uneven and dropped the hatch closer to her reach. She hooked a claw under the window seal and peeled it back. Short cracks ran across the glass. I counted hits and breathed in the pauses. The hazard still blinked, dimmer now. Snow shook from branches and pattered on the roof. My gloves were damp and my legs burned from holding tension. I kept boots planted, hand on the latch, phone dark to save battery. I checked for lights through the broken side glass and saw none. She came back to the hatch and hammered. The high brake lights shattered and red chips rained into the cargo space. I brushed them from my wrist so they wouldn't cut when I pulled the handle. The left hinge gave a long creak. I thought of the cub in the brush and what she thought I was. I held the release and kept my knees locked. Time stretched flat. The rear glass bowed and let a wedge of air into the cargo area. A paw punched through a gap and swept blind. Claws snicked across plastic inches from my boots, leaving white grooves. She withdrew and slammed the hatch harder. The latch under my hand ticked and shifted a hair. I tightened my legs and stayed set. Flashing lights finally topped the rise. I didn't move. Red and blue washed the interior and turned shattered glass into glitter. Sirens rose from far to near. She froze, then turned her head toward the road. Another siren joined. Headlights lit the shoulder, the ditch, and the trees with torn bark. She dropped from the hatch and ran. Snow sprayed under her feet. Branches cracked and she vanished. Engines idled. Doors slammed. A loudspeaker told me to stay in place. I stayed on the cargo floor with my hand on the handle and my boots still braced. A Forest Service truck pulled in behind. Another unit stopped in front, lights bouncing across the trunks and my buckled hood. They kept me inside another 30 minutes in case she circled back. A wildlife specialist in a green jacket stood by the rear quarter with a shotgun loaded with beanbags and talked low through the broken glass. He didn't look away from the timber. When they were sure she was gone, an officer told me to crawl forward slow. I nodded and waited. I slid over the seats, opened when they tapped, and climbed out the passenger side. My legs shook on the ice. They walked me to the shoulder and put a blanket around me. Two others scanned the trees with handheld lights out in the dark. The specialist said mother bears will attack anything that threatens their cubs, even when the cub is already dead. We circled the Jeep under the scene lights. Deep claw marks ran in arcs along the paint. One door skin was punched in like a fist. 3 tires were shredded. The rear glass hung in crazed sheets. The mirror lay in the snow. The bumper was twisted down like a bent spoon. Pale green coolant had frozen in crusts under the crossmember. They towed the Cherokee to a yard in Fort Morgan and took me to the station to warm up and give statements. I called Jake on the sat phone and told him I was fine. The insurance company ruled it an act of nature and covered the damage, but the deductible still hurt. The wildlife report listed 1 cub, deceased on impact, near the tree line. I never drive mountain roads at night anymore, and I always tell people to be extra careful during winter when animals are desperate for food. When I was 7 months pregnant, I took a job working night shifts at Quick-Mart on Elm Street to earn some extra money before maternity leave. It was a modern convenience store with bright LED lights, polished tile, and a big glass front that showed the empty street. After midnight, there were hardly any customers, so I spent most of my time restocking gum, wiping the counter, and reading or watching shows on my tablet between tasks. The job paid pretty well. $17 an hour plus night differential. I clocked in at 10 and clocked out at 6. A manager named Denise left at 11, and after that it was just me until the morning shift came in. Mark, my fiancé, would call around midnight, then again at 2 or 3, just to keep me company. We talked about baby names, his jobs, the crib he was building on weekends. Sometimes I muted the phone when a customer walked in, then unmuted when they left. The store sat in a decent part of Richmond, not far from apartments and a small hospital, with an old oak shading one corner of the lot. I felt safe most nights. We had cameras over every aisle, a convex mirror in the back corner, and a panic button under the counter I never touched. The layout was simple. Lottery stand and coffee islands on the left, coolers and freezer doors humming along the far wall, rows of snacks in the middle, and the restroom down a short hallway by the stockroom door. I brewed new coffee every couple of hours, rotated the hot dogs, and refilled windshield fluid displays by the door. Usually the only people who came in were truck drivers grabbing coffee and snacks, a nurse from the hospital during her break, a couple of guys from the sanitation yard, and the occasional rideshare driver who needed to use the restroom. Our store was off the main highways, so we were not swamped. On quiet nights, I watched a crime show on my tablet with one earbud in. I kept the volume low so I could hear the door chime. Sometimes Mark would tease me about watching that kind of show alone at night. I told him everything here was bright and organized. Nothing creepy about a bright store and a floor buffer leaning by the mop sink. The restroom door had a heavy closer that made a soft thud when it shut. I could hear it from the register. I knew when someone went back there. Thursday, around 1 in the morning, a tall guy in his mid-40s came in. The sensor beeped. I looked up and greeted him the same as I did every customer. "Hey, how's it going?" He did not respond. He kept walking, steady, straight past the soda fountain and the chip aisle to the back hallway. He did not even glance at the coffee pots. He opened the restroom door and went in. The closer thumped. I figured he really had to go. I stood up, stretched my back, and went through a few small tasks. I wiped a ring of dried coffee from the counter. I straightened the scratch-off display. I checked the pump screen from the monitor and marked down the receipt paper levels. The camera that pointed to the back hall showed the restroom door closed. Beige paint, metal handle. No movement. The clock over the office door ticked loud between the cooler cycles. I checked the time. 1:07. At 1:15, I looked back down the hallway and listened. No sink running. No toilet flush. I told myself to relax. People take their time. The sign said, "Restroom for customers." We did not time people. I filled the lids and straws at the fountain. I stacked more cups. The door stayed shut. I picked up my phone and almost texted Mark, but I put it face down on the mat. I could see the man's shadow gap under the door if the light was on, and it was. The thin, bright line across the tiles meant the light was still strong. At 1:22, I took my stool with me to the end of the counter so I could see more of the hallway. I did not leave the register, I just shifted closer. I watched the empty aisles and the quiet door. I heard a car pass on Elm and fade. The convex mirror showed my small figure behind the counter, one hand on the drawer, the other on the cloth I was pretending to use. I listened for any sound. I told myself if it hit half an hour, I would knock and do a wellness check. It felt procedural. It felt like the right move. At 1:27, I got up again and ran a damp towel across the credit card terminal. Another minute passed. I rolled my neck and ankles to avoid cramps. The store smelled like burnt coffee and pine sol. The camera view stayed the same. Shut door, quiet hall, beige paint. I kept my movements slow, normal. No customers meant there was no reason to rush. I stacked more gum. My eyes kept going back to that hallway. I checked the clock. 1:32. Around the 25-minute mark, I started getting worried. I did not panic. I just watched the hall and counted my breaths and ran through options. If someone had a medical issue, I would need to check. If someone was asleep in there, I would have to knock and ask if they were okay. I wiped the register and took 2 steps down the counter to the edge of the aisle so I could see that the door was still closed. It was. The thin line of light was steady. I told myself I would give it 3 more minutes and then call out from the hallway. I was thinking about knocking on the door to make sure he was okay when it finally opened. The door swung out smooth. No hurry, no stumble. The man stepped into the hallway with a soft squeak from his work boots on tile. He looked completely ordinary, clean-shaven, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. His gray hair was neatly combed, like he had checked the mirror. He carried nothing in his hands. His boots looked worn but clean. He seemed like a maintenance worker or electrician. He walked past the register again without looking at me and pushed through the door with a slow, steady pace. The chime sounded once. I watched him through the glass. The lot was empty except for a couple of bug-splattered pumps and a trash can with a new liner. He did not get into a car. He kept walking along Elm Street the way you go if you want the underpass. No cars stopped for him. He did not look back. It was strange for our area at that hour. People usually drove. I stood behind the counter and watched until he was only a shape under the streetlight. Then he was gone. I checked the restroom again. Quick scan, clean sink, dry floor, nothing left behind. I locked it with the key and went back to the counter. I put on a fresh pot of coffee and stacked the empty cardboard cups. The cooler hummed. The clock showed 1:40. I texted Mark a short update and he called me. We talked about the baby kicking that afternoon and how I needed to keep a water bottle close. I told him about the man taking forever in the restroom and then leaving on foot. He said to keep the door locked between customers and to stay behind the counter with the cameras on. I said I would. We kept the line open while I cleaned the roller grill and counted lottery slips. A car stopped for gas and left without coming in. The street was quiet again. Around 2:05, the chimes sounded. The door opened with that same slow push. I looked up, expecting a nurse or a driver. It was the same man. He came straight to the counter and stood at a respectful distance, both hands visible, no sudden moves. He smiled like we were picking up a normal conversation. "Good evening, miss. Now say hello to me properly," he said. His voice was smooth, and he even tilted his head like it was a joke. The corners of his mouth pulled up, not wide, just enough to show he wanted it friendly. I apologized. I greeted him the way I should have. "Good evening, sir. Welcome in." I kept my tone flat and steady. He nodded once, like that settled something. His eyes flicked to the muffins, then back to me. He stood very straight. The phone was on the counter, line open with Mark, screen dark. I slid it a little closer to the register and rested my hand near it. The man's tone changed without warning, sharp, tight. He asked where the chips were. Not a question, more like he already knew and wanted me to say it. He put weight on the words. "Where are the chips?" he said, and there was an edge in it, like I was late to answer. I felt every syllable. I kept my reply simple and pointed my hand toward the snack aisle along the far wall. "Chips are over there, on the right," I said. He watched my hand like he was memorizing the direction. Then he thanked me, almost cheerful again, and walked that way. His steps were light, quiet for boots. He moved down the aisle with his shoulders squared. He stopped in the middle where the big brand bags hang at eye level. I could see him between the candy rack and the impulse shelf. He looked over the rows but did not touch anything. The camera above him picked up his gray hair and the pattern of his plaid. He stood there like he was reading tiny text. He spoke without turning his head. "You have beautiful hair, like a movie star." It was loud enough to carry. No one else was in the store. The compliment felt off in the empty space. I thanked him out of habit, short and neutral. I did not add anything. I kept my hands in sight on the counter and adjusted the stack of receipt paper. He did not take a bag. He walked back to the counter, same steady steps, and lined himself up facing me. No items in his hands. He set his elbows on the edge like he was about to order food. He did not blink much. His gaze moved fast across my face, up and down, left to right, like scanning. It made my skin tighten. I checked the camera monitor to make sure we were both in frame. The convex mirror showed the back of his head and my shoulders. The phone was still on the call with Mark. I did not mute it. He said, "Yeah, just like a movie actress." Same words again. Then his voice jumped and he screamed, "What? You don't like movies?" It was sudden and loud, hitting hard in the bright room. I did not have time to answer. He started yelling about his wife not liking films, how she ruined every night out. He said now his daughter had become just like her. Same tone, same face, same way of turning away when a preview came on. He spoke fast, words colliding, not making sense. Some sentences trailed off. Some doubled back. His eyes looked past me like he was yelling at someone behind the glass. Mark heard everything through the phone and said he was calling the police. I kept my voice even and low and told him to do that. I did not hang up. I did not try to argue with the man. I kept my hands flat on the counter and the panic button within reach, but I did not press it. I kept my body angled so my belly was behind the register. The man leaned in a little like he wanted me to flinch. He pounded a flat hand on the laminate once. It made a dull sound. He spun and hit the chip display with his forearm. The whole rack went sideways. Bags burst open with sharp pops. Chips scattered across the tile, sliding under the shelves and under the energy drink cooler. The display tipped and clattered against the floor, metal legs scraping. He stood there staring at me with empty, cold eyes, chest rising and falling. He did not shout then. He just watched me like waiting for a move. I said, quiet, "Sir, please step back from the counter." He did not move. He tilted his head. I kept breathing even and kept my place. I told Mark, with the phone close to my wrist, that the rack was down and the man was in front of me, and he said officers were on their way. I told myself not to reach for anything except the phone if needed. The man looked at the door like he heard something, then looked back at me. He flexed his hands open and closed. The red and blue lights painted the glass first, then the chime sounded again. 2 officers came in slowly, hands empty, palms out a little. They spoke in calm voices, not sharp. They asked the man to step away from the counter and come talk outside. They did not grab him. They guided him with their bodies, one a step ahead, one a step to the side so he could see both. He turned his head toward me once, a long stare, then followed them out. I stayed behind the counter, still on the phone. I heard the door close. I heard the lights outside humming and a radio crackle. I stood there and counted to 30 before I moved. I picked up the fallen rack with both hands, slow, and set it upright. I left the scattered chips where they were and locked the restroom again. I checked that the hallway was clear. The officers came back in and asked if I was hurt. I said no. They took my statement and asked for the camera timestamps. I gave them the times. My hands were steady enough to write. They told me he was a local homeless man with mental health issues. They said he walked the underpass and sometimes came into late-night places to cool down. They said he had not hurt anyone tonight, and they would take him to a place where he could be checked. They spoke clearly, like they had said this before. They asked if I had someone I could call. I told them my fiancé was on the phone, and I was okay to finish the shift. They left. I kept the door locked and put a wet floor sign near the chips. I swept the floor into the dustpan and tied off a trash bag. I brewed a new pot because the last one tasted burned. I kept the phone line open with Mark until it was almost dawn. I stood where the camera could see me and watched the door until the sun came up behind the oak. After that night, I switched to day shifts. My baby's safety was more important than the extra money. I was working part-time at this pub called 4 Leaves in Salem, while going to Willamette University for economics. The place sat on a corner in the historic downtown, brick walls, green neon shamrock in the window, old photos of trains and mills on the wall. We got a mixed crowd. College kids, guys in work boots, couples splitting fries, an old-timer with a crossword, retirees who came early and left before the music got loud. I ran the bar 4 nights a week. I poured beers, wiped the rail, counted cash, and tried to keep my head clear enough to study after close. One of our regulars was Walter Green. He was 67, retired railroad worker, and he came in every Tuesday and Thursday around 6. He always ordered a Budweiser and chicken wings. He sat at the same table by the front window, the one with a view of the street and the bus stop. He was polite. Quiet, unless you started it. Sometimes he told short stories about winter crews or broken switches on the line. He spoke slow, like he was careful with each word. Then he would eat, pay in cash, tip even, and fold the receipt into his wallet like a ticket. That Thursday in November 2022, I came in for my evening shift and saw Walter already there. It was hardly past 5. The sky was dark already, wet pavement shining under the streetlights. The TV over the bar had a college game on mute. The Friars hissed. I hung up my coat, washed my hands, and looked over. Walter sat at his usual table, but he looked different. He kept turning his head toward the door and then back to the window like he was lost. His mouth moved. He was muttering to himself. That was not like him. I poured his bud and sent the wing order back. I set the beer down on his table with a coaster and said his name to get his attention. He blinked and looked past me, then at me, like he was trying to line up my face with a memory. He nodded and said thanks without meeting my eyes. He didn't touch the beer. He didn't touch the napkin or the wet wipes he always used before he ate. He put both hands flat on the table like he was bracing himself. Then he went back to looking at the window glass. The room filled up fast. A table of 4 students took the high tops near the pool table. A retired couple shared a shepherd's pie at the far wall. 2 guys in safety vests came off the night shift and wanted pictures. I moved back and forth, checked tabs, restocked pint glasses, and hit the glass washer with a stack of mugs. The steam fogged my glasses. Every time I looked up, Walter was in the same pose. Beer still full, wings cooling under the heat lamp at pickup. He kept pressing his thumb against the edge of the table, like he was counting time. I slid the wings out when the ticket beeped and set them down with fresh ranch and celery. The smell of sauce rose up. He didn't look at the plate. He glanced at the door again. The buses hissed and came and went. A light draft pushed in when people entered and left. He flinched when the door opened and then settled. I wiped the bar with a clean towel and checked the POS. Jerry, my manager, was in the back doing inventory and yelling about kegs through the cracked office door. I kept an eye on the floor and on Walter. He had on a brown jacket with a frayed cuff. The cuff threads had a dark stain that looked old. His hands were big and square, a railroad man's hands, the knuckles swollen and shiny. He wore a watch with a scratched face, the kind you can't read from far away because the glass is cloudy. He adjusted it, then turned it around so the face was under his wrist. He took in a long breath and let it go. He mouthed a few words and looked down at his feet. The muscles in his jaw worked like he was chewing air. The noise swelled. Coins clacked on the pool table. The TV flashed field goals. Someone laughed too loud by the jukebox. A draft beer hiccuped foam and I banged the tap handle with a bar spoon to settle it. I kept glancing at the window. Walter stared at his reflection like he didn't recognize it. I walked out from behind the bar to sweep a spill near table 3 and passed close to him. Up close, his eyes looked glassy, not drunk, more like he had not slept. He whispered something and I only caught short and properly. When I got back behind the bar, he shifted in his seat and squared his shoulders like he had made a decision. He stood up slow, using both hands on the table to push off. The chair scraped the floor. He smoothed his jacket with his palms and started toward me. His steps were careful, toes pointed out a little. He kept his chin up. When he reached the bar rail, he smiled wide. It was a very wide smile. That was not like him either. He leaned across the bar, farther than customers usually do, and reached out. Before I knew what he was doing, he had both my hands. It was a double handshake over the rubber bar mat. His palms were dry and hot. His grip was strong for a man his age. He held on. He did not shake. He just locked my hands in his and squeezed. It went on too long. I tried to shift my right hand so I could get to a pint glass, but he adjusted and took it again. He looked into my face and through my face at the same time. "Time's running short now, son. You'll make sure everything gets handled properly, won't you?" he said. He said it calm, with that wide smile still in place. His teeth were even and small, a little yellow from coffee and beer. His breath smelled like peppermint and nothing else, not a hint of alcohol. His eyes didn't lock on mine. They were unfocused, pointed past me at the shelf of whiskey bottles. He squeezed harder as he said properly, like that word was the important part. I nodded out of habit more than anything and tried to slide my hands back. He didn't let go. The register pinged and the fry timer went off in the kitchen, but the bar felt very quiet in that second. I could hear the soft stick of his skin on mine, the small squeak of rubber from the bar mat under his wrists. I glanced down his arm and saw a tremor in his forearm muscle. I told myself he'd had more than usual, but his Budweiser was full on his table, and the wings sat there untouched under the shine. He tilted his head, still smiling, like my nod had not been enough of an answer. His thumbs pressed the backs of my hands. His nails were cut short and clean. He wore no ring. He didn't blink much, The longer he held on, the more my arms tensed without me wanting them to. I thought about calling for Jerry, but Jerry always told us to keep customers happy and calm before we escalate anything. Walter was a regular. He had never caused a problem. I told myself to keep my voice level and keep eye contact. He kept the smile fixed and leaned in closer over the bar. I could see the thread on his collar had come loose, a single line of fabric hanging down the front. His breath hit my cheek. He moved his grip a fraction, like he was adjusting his fingers to keep the hold. I felt the bones in my hands grind a little. The skin pulled tight across my knuckles. I didn't yank away because that would have made a scene. I waited for a natural break in the contact that didn't come. He held on and kept smiling. My face felt hot from the kitchen vents and his nearness. The light off the overheads reflected in his pupils. I tried to say we were busy and that I'd be right back with napkins. My mouth didn't move. He didn't seem to notice the noise around us. The door opened again. Cold air moved across the floor and touched my ankles. The bus sighed outside. The game clock changed on the TV. He didn't look. His grip stayed tight. My forearms started to ache and I shifted my weight, planning to step back and take my hands with me in one smooth motion. He followed a half step with his upper body so I couldn't break free without yanking. I didn't want to yank. I waited again. I tried to lower my hands so he had to bend and lose leverage. He adjusted and kept the same pressure. I said his name once, soft, seeing if that would draw him out of whatever he was in. Walter kept smiling, this unnaturally wide smile that was starting to make me uncomfortable. After the weird handshake, he let go like a switch had flipped and walked back to his table. He sat for maybe 2 minutes. He didn't touch the Budweiser. He didn't test the wings. He kept that same fixed smile for a few seconds. Then it turned off. He blinked and looked at the window again. He stood, slid his chair in carefully, and headed for the door. He didn't look at me as he passed. The bell over the door tapped the glass. Cold air moved in. He stepped out and was gone. I looked at the full plate and the sweating beer and thought it was odd. People leave drinks all the time, but he never did. I set the plate under the pass to keep it out of the way and asked a server to box it in case he came back. Jerry came out to ask why there was a full ticket open, and I told him Walter had stepped out. Jerry shrugged and went back to the office. The night smoothed out. Pints, tabs, a jammed receipt printer, the normal stuff. I wiped the rail, stacked tumblers, cut limes, and watched the last 2 tables argue over darts. A guy at the end paid in quarters, and I rolled my eyes when he wasn't looking. I pulled mats and hosed them in the mop sink. I counted my drawer twice and clocked out a little after midnight. I walked home past the courthouse and the empty bus stop. The air smelled like rain and diesel. I unlocked my apartment near campus, kicked off my shoes by the door, and put my phone on the charger. I ate a bowl of cereal standing up and fell asleep with the TV talking low. The phone woke me before my alarm. It was a little after 7. Jerry's name flashed. His voice was tight. He said the police had called the bar. They found Walter's body on the sidewalk by the intersection of Commercial Street and Church Street, 3 blocks from us. He said the officer told him it was early, not much traffic. Someone out walking a dog had seen a man down and called it in. The words hit in a slow way. I asked if they were sure. Jerry said they checked his wallet. I sat up and looked at my sneakers by the door and tried to line up the timeline. Walter had left before 7:30. The street he took was the same one with the bus stop he watched every week. I asked if they knew what happened. Jerry said the dispatcher didn't say much, just that the police wanted to know about Walter's night. He told me to be ready for a call and that he was heading in early to open and clean before they arrived. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I stared at the steam and then poured it down the sink. I put on the same jeans from the night before and sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand. The room felt small. Campus garbage trucks beeped in the alley. At 8:15, my phone rang again. It was the number Jerry had texted me. A calm woman introduced herself as Detective Sandra Lopez. She asked if I had a few minutes to talk about one of our patrons from last night. She said Walter had been taken to Salem Hospital and pronounced dead on arrival. Severe head trauma. They found our bar receipt in his wallet with the timestamp printed on it, which is why they reached out. She asked if he seemed intoxicated. I said his beer was full the whole time. She asked if he was agitated or different. I said he was different. I told her about the smile and the handshake and the strange sentence. I said he didn't eat. I said he left without his food. She didn't interrupt. I kept it to the facts. She told me the medical examiner believed the head injury had likely happened several hours before he died. Maybe even before he came in to see us. She said that kind of injury can make people act off, talk strange, and look through you. A slow bleed, she said. It lined up with what I had seen. I thought back to his eyes not focusing and his jaw working. I asked if he had been attacked in the alley. She said they didn't know yet. She asked me to repeat his exact words if I could. I did. She was quiet for a second and thanked me. She asked more about timing. When he arrived. When he left. Whether anyone followed him out. I told her he came early, left early, and nobody went out the door with him. I said there was a bus that stopped out front. She asked if he had argued with anyone. I said no. I told her we had a normal Thursday crowd, and I listed the kinds of people there. She said Jerry had told her he hadn't paid much attention to Walter because he never caused trouble. She didn't judge it. She said they were canvassing the route between our door and the intersection. After the call, Jerry asked me to come in to walk through the timeline again so he could write it down while it was fresh. I got there around 9. The place looked different in daylight. Chairs up, floor still drying from the mop, the green neon off. Jerry stood by the bar with a legal pad and a pen. He had already put Walter's untouched wings in the trash. He rubbed his face a lot. We kept the talk short, wrote down the times as best we could, and kept our answers the same simple way. Around lunch, I got another call. It was Detective Lopez again. She sounded the same, steady. She said the autopsy had started, and early findings showed that Walter had been struck by a blunt object, not a fall, a hit. Internal bleeding in his brain that built up over hours. With that kind of injury, she said, people can look okay, walk, talk, even go to familiar places, until the pressure climbs too high. That's when they go down. She said it explained the smile, the confusion, the way he didn't eat. I thanked her for telling me. She said it mattered to understand what we saw. She didn't ask me for anything else right then. I hung up and stood behind the bar for a long minute. I looked at the table by the front window. The napkin dispenser sat in the same place as always. The salt shaker was half full. I remembered his hands on mine and the word he squeezed on. Properly. Word got around fast. A couple of regulars came in that night and asked me if it was true. I said yes. I kept the details short. They nodded and ordered light. The bar felt off. The TV noise felt wrong. The window seemed bigger. I pulled pints and wiped the same spot over and over. When the door opened, I looked at the sidewalk every time. The police kept working, but nothing broke. No camera caught anything helpful. No one saw a fight. No wallet missing. Nothing like that. They didn't say it was a robbery. They didn't say it wasn't. The line they stayed with was a blunt object, unknown assailant, unknown location. The case slowed, then it cooled. Jerry kept a printout of the incident number under the register and gave it to anyone who asked. Walter had one living relative, a niece from Portland. She called the bar and thanked Jerry for taking the time to answer questions. She came to Salem for the funeral. She was quiet and organized. She wore a black coat and stood with the pastor, then with two women from a church group. After the service, she stopped by our place. She told us the bar had meant a lot to Walter after his wife died. He liked the noise and the routine. He liked the view of the bus stop. She said thank you again and left. The next Thursday, we left his table empty. We didn't seat anyone there. Jerry put a coaster and a folded napkin on the wood and set a full, unopened Budweiser on top of the napkin. The TV was on low. The doorbell tapped now and then. Around 7, the regulars who knew stood up without anyone telling them. I stood at the end of the bar and raised a pint. Jerry lifted his too. For a moment it was quiet in the room. We said his name and we raised a toast.